Chapter 18. Chu Qianyue frowned as she walked out of the zero-gravity room of Xiansong University's training hall. Recently, her spatial perception had completely stagnated. No matter how she cultivated, there was no progress. Last time, when she went to the border of the Hades, she almost couldn't come back. If it wasn't for that strange little guy who appeared at the location and punched through the spatial barrier, allowing her to receive the signal of the location at the critical moment and open the void door, escaping the encirclement of dozens of malicious ghosts, she feared that she would have already become part of the dark ghost. When Chu Qianyue came back, she checked the map in her spiritual brain and didn't find any problems. The location found by the spiritual brain was also correct, so there must be a problem with her spatial perception. Tearing space was Chu Qianyue's secret, so she could only figure it out by herself and couldn't ask anyone. No matter how high a human cultivator's cultivation was, they didn't have such an ability. Only the dark ghost had it. Chu Qianyue had the ability to travel through space because of her special background. This was a secret she couldn't tell anyone. Last time, that little guy's punch actually contained a weak spatial power. If I can find him, maybe he can help me improve the accuracy of my spatial perception. Chu Qianyue secretly thought. Just as she went down to the training hall, a young man walked in from outside. Chu Qianyue felt that he was somewhat familiar. Looking up, her delicate and beautiful face froze. Wasn't this the little guy from last time? Speak of the devil. Chu Qianyue's pair of phoenix eyes flashed with joy. She didn't expect that this little guy was actually a student of Xiansong University. Chu Qianyue was going to leave the training hall and go back to the dormitory to rest for a while. She was going to teach the class in the afternoon, but after seeing Li Daochong, she changed her mind and went to the locker room. Li Daochong naturally didn't know that he was being watched by Xiansong University's specially invited lecturer, Chu Qianyue. He opened the door of the training room with a surprised face. There were quite a lot of people in the training hall at noon. The seniors were all training hard. Everyone was focused on their training. Li Daochong went straight to the corner of the hall on the first floor of the training center, where several magical equipment testing devices with array glyphs as the main internal structure were placed. Some are used to test fish strength, some are used to test speed, and some are used to test the degree of opening of spirit veins. In short, there were all kinds of testing devices used to test various abilities. Although a more comprehensive test could be conducted in the virtual spirit realm on the spirit intranet. Li Daochong's ID in the virtual spirit realm had already been deleted by his predecessor. This was because that was the place where that idiot had been hurt. It was also where he had been mocked for the first time. People who hid behind a spiritual brain were far more unscrupulous than those who were in front of them. Before Li Tianyang's accident, the people around Li Daochong at least did not dare to do anything to him. However, it was different on the spiritual net. Who would know who you were? The virtual spiritual realm on the spiritual nexus was a nightmare for Li Daochong's predecessor. He would rather sit by his bed in a daze than go online. The identity verification in the virtual spirit realm was rather troublesome, and the registration of an ID was a bit cumbersome. Li Daochong did not have the time to apply for a new ID. Li Daochong could only use these basic array glyphs to test his strength. There was almost no one in this corner. Seeing that no one was paying attention to him, Li Daochong raised his hand and punched the fist strength testing device. Bang! A number quickly appeared on the spirit light screen. 502 gene. The corner of Li Daochong's mouth rose slightly. Last time, his result in the class test was 78 gene. This time, a casual punch was over 250 gene. If he gathered his strength for a punch, it would be at least 500 gene. It was enough to shatter the skull of a stone horn bull. Li Daochong did not want to attract attention. After seeing the test result, he turned off the fist strength testing device and walked over to the mental strength testing device that looked a bit like a large game console. Li Daochong stuck 2 suction cups to his temples and pressed the array glyph switch on the device. Immediately, a whirlpool diagram appeared on the spirit light screen with a line of words below it. Please focus on the diagram. Li Daochong did as he was told. A few seconds later, the whirlpool diagram on the spirit light screen began to spin rapidly. It spun faster and faster. The back of the device began to smoke and emit a Hanwu. With a snap, the spirit light screen went out and no value was given. This scene was completely seen by Chu Qingyue, who had just changed into a student's uniform. Her beautiful eyes flashed as if she had found a treasure. She could not help but mutter to herself. The strength of this little guy's mental strength actually exceeded the measurement range of the basic testing device, causing the array glyphs inside the device to become chaotic. Interesting. No wonder he could break the space barrier. At this moment, Chu Qinyue's beautiful face that was as cold as ice unexpectedly revealed a trace of a smile. Her beautiful eyes flashed with a trace of craftiness that had never appeared in her eyes before. With a flick of her slender finger, a stream of spiritual energy shot into the testing device that Li Daocheng was using at this time. Immediately, Chu Qinyue used a little trick of invisibility and disappeared. This kind of trick was only useful for the qi refining stage and ordinary people. Once one reached the qi gathering stage, they would be able to see through it. Of course, it was also useless for people who were born with an extremely strong spatial perception. Li Daocheng found it strange. He pressed the array glyph switch several times, but the device did not have any reaction. He pressed it several more times. Suddenly, a series of popping sounds came from inside. It seemed that the device was broken. Li Daocheng had a guilty conscience. He glanced around, seeing that no one was paying attention to him. He hurriedly took off the suction cups and left. He had to compensate for damaging the school's property. Although this kind of testing device was not of a high grade, it was complicated to make. The material was also very special. It was also purely handmade. The array glyphs inside were also very exquisite. It was said that the price was not cheap. It seemed to be more than 100,000 Federation coins. If he was really the one who broke it, he would have to pay for it. However, he did not do anything, and it was inexplicably broken. It must have been in disrepair for a long time. Li Daocheng did not want to be a sucker. Li Daocheng hurriedly turned around, ready to slip away. However, just as he turned around, he did not know when, but someone had appeared behind him. It was a beautiful female senior with a ponytail. At this moment, there was a strange expression on her beautiful face as she looked at him. When did she stand behind him? How come he did not feel anything? The corner of Li Daocheng's eyes twitched. He pretended to be calm. Li Daocheng acted as if nothing had happened. He lowered his head and was about to bypass this female senior who had suddenly appeared and continued to slip away. "Student, this testing device seems to have been broken by you," the beautiful senior said with an "I saw everything" expression. "How could that be? You must have seen wrongly." Excuse me. I need to go to the toilet." Li Daocheng had an innocent expression on his face. He raised his voice an octave to cover up his guilty conscience and was about to run away. Just as the beautiful senior was about to say something, a roar came from the direction of the training room's entrance. "Li Daocheng, get out here. I want to duel with you." The entire training room quieted down with this roar. Everyone looked at Zhao Peng, who was standing at the entrance and shouting. The seniors had strange expressions on their faces. There was actually someone who would duel in this day and age. Duel? Isn't that one of the oldest school rules in our school? There's going to be a good show. The kid who issued the challenge looks very unfamiliar. He should be a freshman from the common class. Only a bunch of idiots would use such a method to solve problems. Why does the name Li Daocheng sound so familiar? Ah, isn't Li Daocheng the son of the traitor Li Tianyang? It's said that his brain is not very bright. Not only is his brain not bright, didn't you see the weird video of him eating and drinking on the school spirit net? It's said that this kid has depression. Look, there he is. He's standing in the testing area like a fool, just like in the video. When did he come to the training room? Li Daocheng was a little confused when he heard the roar, but when he saw that the person who shouted was Zhao Peng, his expression instantly turned cold. However, his serious and cold expression only lasted for less than half a second. Li Daocheng was once again confused. His eyes turned into two small dots, and a stream of clear liquid flowed out of his nose. The beautiful senior who had been standing beside him just now was gone. How is this possible? What the hell? When that girl appeared, she had been standing one step behind me without making a sound. I did not notice her at all. Now I just glanced at Zhao Peng, and when I turned around, She was gone? Li Daocheng looked around, but the beautiful senior was nowhere to be seen. When Zhao Peng saw that Li Daocheng was ignoring him, he quickly walked up to him and said word by word, "Li Daocheng, I challenge you to a duel." Almost at the same time, the beautiful senior's voice rang in Li Daocheng's ears. "If you don't want anyone to know that you are the one who damaged the tester, come to Zero Gravity Room number 5 on the 3rd floor of the training hall tomorrow. I have recorded the process of you damaging the tester. If you don't come, I will send the video to the head of the training hall." Li Daocheng looked around nervously, but he did not look at Zhao Peng. Zhao Peng frowned. "Li Daocheng, what is the meaning of this? Do you agree or not? Give me a straight answer. When you came in, did you see a girl standing beside me?" Li Daocheng looked at Zhao Peng for the first time and asked. "The rumors are false. This kid doesn't have depression. He clearly has schizophrenia." That's right. It is said that only people with schizophrenia would imagine seeing people who don't exist. Depression doesn't. That's right. I think I saw this kid talking to the air just now. He's seriously ill. Several students who were closest to Li Daocheng whispered to each other. Zhao Peng was angry. He moved closer to Li Daocheng and lowered his voice. He threatened, "Li Daocheng, don't pretend to be crazy in front of me. If you dare to refuse to duel with me today, you can wait to collect the corpse of that girl next to you." "I refuse," Li Daocheng said loudly, one word at a time. "This kid isn't stupid either. Too bad, there won't be a good show to watch." Someone said regretfully, "A traitor's son. Even if his brain is not good, he is still a coward." Someone said disdainfully, "For a traitor's son, the people around him did not have any sympathy for him because he was weak. Instead, they wanted to see him get beaten up." Zhao Peng didn't expect that Li Daocheng wouldn't be threatened at all and would refuse in front of everyone. His final plan had been ruined, and he had no chance to enter the elite class. He was so angry that he couldn't speak. He paused for a moment before fiercely saying, "Li Daocheng, you've got guts." Zhao Peng gnashed his teeth and turned to leave. "Stop!" Li Daocheng shouted. Zhao Peng stopped and turned around. His face was ferocious. He was so sad to lose the elite class. "What? Regret? It's too late to regret. Once a duel challenge is rejected, it cannot be changed. You can rest assured that I will take good care of that girl." "Zhao Peng, Li Daocheng, want to duel with you," Li Daocheng said expressionlessly. Chapter 19. Zhao Peng, who thought that he had completely bid farewell to the elite class, thought that he was hallucinating when he heard Li Daocheng's challenge. In Zhao Peng's mind, Li Daocheng was a naturally timid person with an extremely weak personality. Even if he had 3 times the courage, he would never challenge him to a duel. However, Zhao Peng quickly realized that he wasn't hallucinating. That fool really did challenge him to a duel. Zhao Peng turned around and smiled at Li Daocheng. His smile was brilliant. He could almost see himself entering the elite class and killing Li Daocheng with just a finger. Zhao Peng's emotions, which had fallen into the abyss, flew up into the clouds. His breathing became hurried. Afraid that Li Daocheng would go back on his word, he immediately said, "I agree." This scene was recorded by a few gossipy girls using their intelligent wristwatches and uploaded to the school's spiritual net. In just a few minutes, the school's spiritual net forum exploded. After the news spread, students continuously flocked to the training hall. The duel arena was set up in the open-air field behind the training hall. Most of the time, there weren't many people here. Only when classes required would a lecturer lead the students here to use the arena to talk about practical combat techniques. The duel arena hadn't been used for more than 20 years. The school felt that the duel arena's function was more to commemorate the past and had no practical use. Who would still duel these days? It was a product of the cultivation Middle Ages. It couldn't keep up with the development of the times, so it wasn't renovated. The circular stone platform was covered in moss. When it rained, one could even skate on it. There were many potholes on the stone platform. There were also some gravel scattered all over the stone platform. The whole thing looked dirty and messy, as if it hadn't been cleaned in a long time. If there was anything worth praising about the duel arena, it would be the talisman array patterns on the edge of the stone platform and the old astral level spiritual brain embedded under the stone platform. Activating the spiritual brain would trigger the glyph array at the edge of the stone platform, isolating the dual arena from the outside world. The original purpose of this was to prevent people from secretly using underhanded means to help one side. With the isolating glyph array, it would prevent dirty deeds and allow both sides to compete fairly. Zhao Peng stepped onto the dual arena. He was incomparably excited. This would be his springboard to the elite class. The moss on the stone platform was the most beautiful plant in the world in Zhao Peng's eyes. It was full of vitality and beauty. Li Daochong glanced at the dual arena and then turned to leave. Zhao Peng was anxious. Li Daochong, you want to run away? Let me tell you, you agreed to the duel. If you go back on your word, you'll be trampled on the glory of those who joined the army and bravely fought against the Hades. And will be trampled, ons will be trampled. The honor will be trampled on. Yuel's Peng. Not only Zhao Peng, but the students who came to watch the match also scoffed at Li Daochong's behavior of running away before even stepping onto the ring. This idiot isn't stupid after all. He knows that he can't win, so he ran away. The surrounding students mocked. Li Daochong curled his lips. He turned around and said, "What's the rush? I forgot a few things. Go get them. I'll be right back." Zhao Peng's face was ashen. He could only let Li Daochong go. As long as he didn't step onto the duel arena, he couldn't make a move. The duel regulations stipulated that after both sides agreed to the duel, they were allowed half an hour to prepare. If they didn't step onto the duel arena after half an hour, it would be considered a breach of trust. A few minutes later, Li Daochong dragged his feet back. He was even pushing a shabby handcart. Inside was a pile of items. He arrived at the duel arena. Inside the handcart was a large pile of miscellaneous items. There was anti-slip powder, protective gear, and even a bucket of water. More and more students flocked over to watch the show. When they saw Li Daochong dragging over a pile of training equipment, they were all dumbfounded. They didn't understand what was going on. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Li Daochong acted as if there was no one around him. He stretched his back, did push-ups, and warmed up. What is this idiot doing? Does he think he's filming a Spirit Realm blockbuster? A student said with a look of disdain. Zhao Peng stood on the arena for a long time, but Li Daochong still hadn't come up. He was a bit impatient. Li Daochong, don't waste time. Hurry up and don't do those useless things. The anti-slip powder is for equipment training. The leather chest armor is just for decoration. It's useless without protective array glyphs. What are you doing with the bucket of water? Li Daochong turned a deaf ear to Zhao Peng's words. He minded his own business and continued his preparations. He first put the bucket of water on the arena. Then, he wiped the anti-slip powder on his hands, put on a helmet, and carried the leather armor. Only then did he step onto the arena. After Li Daochong had done so much foreplay, the audience had long since lost interest in this life and death duel. They all thought of Li Daochong as a clown. Did this kid's brain get caught in a door? How is this an idiot? He's just an idiot. A student couldn't help but curse when he saw Li Daochong walk onto the arena with so many useless things for no reason. Ouyang Qian, who was standing behind the student, frowned. She was probably the only one who didn't think Li Daochong was an idiot. After Li Daochong left her that day, Ouyang Qian took out a hidden image recording glyph from her belt and watched everything that had happened after she fainted. After watching it, Ouyang Qian was both shocked and scared. Zhao Peng had actually used the bound spirit to control her. If it wasn't for Li Daochong, she would have most likely died. She had blamed Li Daochong wrongly. However, when Li Daochong had been able to punch the bound spirit out of her body and easily kill it, Ouyang Qian had suspected that the image recording glyph was broken and that the scene being played back was fake. Being able to hit the bound spirit meant that Li Daochong wasn't as weak as the rumors said. His spiritual veins were dried up, and he didn't have a trace of spiritual energy. After watching the scene, Ouyang Qian immediately regretted not recording it. The image recording glyph could only be used once. Why did Zhao Peng want to kill her and Li Daochong? Why was Li Daochong so powerful? Ouyang Qian discovered that she seemed to be involved in a conspiracy, which made her unable to sleep for the entire night. She was just an ordinary poor student with a humble background. She relied on her own efforts to enter the profound Blue University. After graduation, she could enter a good cultivation company to work. She did not want to start a feud with anyone. Zhao Peng's talent was above hers. Li Daocheng's family was illustrious. Even if his father committed a disgraceful crime and he was kicked out of the family, he was still a direct descendant of the Li family, one of the four great families of Blue Bay Star. Ouyang Qian couldn't afford to provoke these two people. Ouyang Qian didn't come to school the next day. She was worried that Zhao Peng would find trouble with her if he saw that she was still alive. However, Zhao Peng seemed to know that she wasn't dead. He asked someone to give her the remaining 2 spirit stones and sent her a message. If you still want to study at Profound Heaven University, then act as if nothing happened. Seeing Zhao Peng's warning, Ouyang Qian was angry. She took advantage of the few days off and successfully broke through to the 3rd level of the refining chi stage. Now, her strength wasn't much different from Zhao Peng's, so the worry in her heart disappeared a lot. The Federation emphasized the cultivation method, so she didn't believe that Zhao Peng would dare to mess around. Today, when she arrived at school, she heard that Li Daocheng and Zhao Peng were going to duel. After hearing the news, Ouyang Qian immediately rushed over to watch the duel. After knowing Li Daocheng's secret, Ouyang Qian believed that this would be a fierce duel. Li Daocheng would definitely make the spectators' jaws drop. Ouyang Qian was sure that everyone would think that Li Daocheng couldn't withstand a single blow from Zhao Peng. It wouldn't be strange if he was beaten to death in the duel arena. After all, Li Daocheng was known as a cripple, but Zhao Peng was different. In Xiansong University's cultivation department, Zhao Peng might not count for much, but in the common class, Zhao Peng was ranked in the top 10. In the first semester, he broke through the 2nd level of the refining chi stage and entered the 3rd level of the refining chi stage. Now, he was probably only a step away from the 4th level of the refining chi stage. Not only that, Zhao Peng's constitution was good and he was very talented in combat. However, after seeing Li Daocheng kill Binding Spirit with a whip kick, Ouyang Qian believed that Zhao Peng might not be a match for Li Daocheng. This fool would prove himself in this duel. But when Ouyang Qian stood in the crowd and saw Li Daocheng's silly clown-like behavior, she was completely dumbfounded. Ouyang Qian was completely bewildered. She even began to doubt herself. Could it be that the person on the Shadow Echo Talisman was not Li Daocheng? At this moment, Li Daocheng finally walked into the arena and stood in front of Zhao Peng. Zhao Peng was afraid that Li Daocheng would play some trick to stall for time, so he hurriedly activated the isolation glyph array. In an instant, the arena was surrounded by a spirit wave wall, isolating it from the outside world. Zhao Peng didn't say anything and rushed at Li Daocheng. "Wait a minute," Li Daocheng suddenly shouted. Zhao Peng, who had already rushed in front of Li Daocheng, was stunned. His raised fist stopped. Facing a fool, Zhao Peng had nothing to fear. "Do you have any last words?" Before Zhao Peng could finish speaking, Li Daocheng swung his hand, and a handful of anti-slip powder flew at Zhao Peng. The powder danced in the air. Zhao Peng was caught off guard, and a lot of powder flew into his eyes and nose, causing him to cough violently. "Cough, cough, damn it, Li Daocheng, you're playing dirty." Zhao Peng was flustered and exasperated. "Dirty your sister, I'm obviously above board. So how am I playing dirty? Didn't I tell you to wait a minute? Who told you to act pretentious and steal my words? I was going to tell you to wait a minute. Be careful, I'm going to throw the anti-slip powder." Li Daocheng boldly retorted. The audience below the arena watched this scene with their mouths wide open. Wasn't anti-slip powder used to prevent slipping? Who would have thought that a fool would use anti-slip powder to play dirty? This didn't make sense. Too despicable, too shameless. He actually used anti-slip powder to blind his opponent's eyes. When did this fool learn how to use his brain? Before the students below the arena could react, Li Daocheng opened the leather armor in his hand and put on Zhao Peng's body. Only then did the students realize that Li Daocheng had done something to the leather armor. The ropes on both sides of the leather armor were stretched out, directly binding Zhao Peng's entire body, including his hands. Li Daocheng violently pulled on one of the ropes, completely binding Zhao Peng's upper body. Zhao Peng's arms were bound, and he was so angry that he didn't care whether he could see or not. He raised his legs and kicked wildly. Li Daocheng had already run away, carrying the bucket of water and pouring it at Zhao Peng's feet. The originally slippery, mossy stone surface became like ice under the baptism of the water. Zhao Peng, who was kicking wildly, fell to the ground with a thump. Li Daocheng picked up a stone and smashed it hard on Zhao Peng's head. Ah! A mournful scream. Once, twice, thrice, until Zhao Peng no longer made any sound, lying motionless on the wet, mossy stone surface. Zhao Peng had already fainted, but Li Daocheng didn't stop. He changed his position and hit Zhao Peng's legs. Once, twice, thrice, bang, 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 crack. Zhao Peng's leg bones were forcefully broken by Li Daocheng. The students watching from outside the arena subconsciously touched their own thighs. It hurt just looking at it. So ruthless. Zhao Peng has already fainted, and he's still not stopping. He's going to die. Li Daocheng, stop. You're going to kill him. The rules of the duel state that the opponent is unable to fight back or is unconscious. Otherwise, the Federation Security Bureau will classify it as murder. Finally, someone couldn't help but stop him. Chapter 20. The students below the stage were all dumbstruck. How could someone say something like that be mentally ill? At this moment, how could the students who had previously treated Li Daocheng as a joke still think of him as a fool? Is he really going to kill him? Some students were stunned. Who would have thought that such a harmless idiot would be so fierce, comparable to a lion that had been starved for 3 days and 3 nights? So ruthless. Someone below the stage exclaimed. It seems that Li Daocheng really does have a disability certificate, a mild intellectual disability. It was reported on the news many years ago and was quite sensational at the time. Li Tianyang is the head of the Li family, one of the 4 great clans. He has outstanding strength and talent, but he gave birth to a fool who was said to have choked on amniotic fluid when he was born. So if Li Daocheng really kills that kid, it'll be for nothing? Li Daocheng didn't have the slightest intention of stopping. Zhao Peng threatening him with a silver bottle was his biggest mistake, and he wanted to kill him at that moment. At the same time he challenged Zhao Peng, Li Daocheng quickly analyzed the best plan in his mind, just like programming. Li Daocheng's strength had increased greatly, but in the end, he was still only at the 3rd level of qi refining. Compared to Zhao Peng, who was in the top 10 of the ordinary class, his foundation wasn't solid. That night, Li Daocheng had actually used all his strength to beat down the flying shuttle gang. His telekinesis attack had been a great help, otherwise Li Daocheng might not have been a match for Lu Feng alone. And the flying shuttle gang's group of hooligans were all unorthodox cultivators, so it was inevitable that they would take a detour. They simply couldn't compare with the students of Xiansong University, a 4th-ranked cultivation university. The vast majority of students who could enter Xiansong University were the cream of the crop in Blue Bay Star. It should be known that the college entrance exam acceptance rate for the entire Blue Bay Star was 106. Roughly 1 in 10 would be admitted to a cultivation university, and Xiansong University was the #1 school in Blue Bay Star, one of the key cultivation universities of the Federation's Project 199. Every year, the number of Blue Bay Star College entrance examination was around 30 million. Every year, Profound Song University would only recruit 5,000 people from all the faculties. Among them, there were only a few dozen special sponsorships. Simply put, one could spend money to enter Vast Heaven University. For example, Li Daocheng was originally admitted to Vast Heaven University because Li Tianyang had spent a lot of money to sponsor him. Otherwise, with Li Daocheng's qualifications, he wouldn't even be able to graduate from high school. Of course, having a superior family background was also a part of one's strength. As the saying goes, the ancestors plant the trees and the descendants enjoy the shade. For Li Daocheng to be able to enter Dark Blue University, he belonged to the type of people who enjoyed the shade. However, situations like Li Daocheng's were extremely rare in Profound Firmament University. This kind of method was also looked down upon by the majority of students. However, the majority of the students who entered Profound Firmament University were elites with outstanding strength. Their high schools were all famous schools, and their foundations were extremely solid. Even if it was the ordinary class of Xiansong University, when compared to the entire Blue Bay Star, it would definitely belong to the elite class. Li Daocheng didn't dare to underestimate Zhao Peng's strength, especially when Zhao Peng had been able to control the three dwarf ghosts and the bound spirit to trap him. From this, it could be seen that Zhao Peng had his own unique skill. The dark ghost was not so easy to control. Besides this superficial analysis, Li Daocheng also had another layer of concern. Li Daocheng knew that Zhao Peng was just a chess piece. Behind him, Zhan Honglai was the real master who wanted his life. If Zhao Peng was a mouse, then Zhan Honglai was a viper hiding in the shadows, ready to strike at any time. Li Daocheng had grown up in the Li family. Even if his predecessor's brain wasn't very bright, it wasn't that he had cerebral palsy. It was just that his intelligence was lacking, and at most he could be considered stupid. Growing up, he had been influenced by what he saw and heard, so he had a certain understanding of the various families in Tianyuan City. The Zhan family was considered a mid-tier family in Tianyuan City. Although it couldn't compare to the four great families, it had a foundation establishment ancestor overseeing it. It was said that he was an old cadre of the military. Not only did they have strength, but they also had a background. The family's influence was still very strong. Before Li Tianyang's accident, no matter how stupid Li Daocheng was, no one would dare to have any ideas about him. Even though Qiao Shima was the #1 beauty of Tianyuan City, most people felt that the Qiao family was the one who had profited. Even if the number of men who adored Qiao Shima could line up 3 times around Tianyuan City, no one would dare to steal Li Daocheng's woman. This was because Li Daocheng was the only son of the Li family. His father, Li Tianyang, was a Jin Dan cultivator. If one of these two conditions was met, they could walk sideways, let alone if both conditions were met. Even if Zhan Honglai had 100 guts, he would never dare to steal Li Daocheng's woman. But now everything was different. Li Tianyang's name had been removed from the family, and Li Daocheng had been kicked out of the family. This wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that Li Tianyang had betrayed the country and turned traitor. This was fatal. Li Tianyang was just a Jin Dan cultivator. Even if he was a Yuanian cultivator, it was useless. Betraying the country and the army was the most serious crime. It could be said that one's reputation was ruined and everyone had the right to punish him. He was the enemy of the entire country and the entire nation. Li Daocheng had returned to the time before liberation. It was already good enough that he hadn't been arrested by the Federation's Cultivation Security Bureau for the crime of collaborating with the enemy and locked up on the Dark Dungeon planet. Without the protection of his clan, without the protection of his father, Li Daocheng was nothing. It wasn't strange that Zhan Honglai had started to deal with him in order to get Qiao Shima. Given his identity and status, the current Li Daocheng was just an ant that could be crushed to death at any time in Zhan Honglia's eyes. The only protective talisman Li Daocheng could still rely on was the fact that he had once been the legitimate son of the Li family. The Li family had said that Li Daocheng hadn't been removed from the family tree, but had just been exiled to gain experience. Of course, anyone with a discerning eye knew that the only reason the Li family hadn't completely distanced themselves from Li Daocheng was because they wanted to get back the Qiao family's considerable betrothal gift, as well as the mine where a small amount of silver was said to have been found. Once Li Daocheng's last bit of value was used up, everyone knew that the Li family wouldn't hesitate to kick Li Daocheng out without a shred of mercy. Right now, the Li family only wanted to draw a clear line between themselves and Li Tianyang and his son, and prove to the Federation government that the family had nothing to do with the defection. The Li family wasn't having a good time either. After Li Tianyang's defection, the Federation government conducted a comprehensive investigation of the Li family. Although the matter had basically been settled, and the investigation concluded that Li Tianyang's defection was a personal act and had nothing to do with the family, the impact of the incident was too great and too bad. The Li family would need some time to recover. Li Daocheng was aware of all the circumstances. Originally, He had wanted to keep a low profile and develop his strength to a certain extent before investigating his father, Li Tianyong. Li Tianyong wasn't Li Daocheng's cheap father. As mentioned before, Li Daocheng could empathize with his predecessor. Originally, they had grown up together, but the predecessor had been in a dominant position. When Li Daocheng was in the main branch, he was only in a relatively free state. Li Tianyong's deep fatherly love was something that Li Daocheng deeply understood. Once someone spoke ill of Li Daocheng behind his back, and Li Tianyong heard it. He directly beat that person into a second-class cripple. In order to treat Li Daocheng's depleted spirit veins and stupidity, he spent a lot of effort. When Li Daocheng was 10 years old, he contracted a strange disease and almost died. He had to consume a plant called the Yang Soul Grass. This strange plant could only be found on the Kunwa planet. Li Tianyong didn't hesitate to consume his true yuan and spiritual energy to prolong Li Daocheng's life for 5 days. He risked damaging his spirit foundation and forcefully pulled Li Daocheng back from the gates of hell. When the Li family's men of sacrifice came back from the Kunwa planet in the Seven-Ring Starfield, Li Daocheng's life was saved. Apart from Li Tianyong's behavior, his appearance was exactly the same as Li Daocheng's father on Earth. Even the black mole on his neck was exactly the same. Their personalities were also almost the same. There was no doubt that Li Tianyong was his father here. Just like him, he was just another him in another universe. Li Daocheng was very glad that he was still his father's son. Therefore, when Li Tianyong defected, Li Daocheng didn't believe it no matter what. Based on Li Daocheng's understanding of his father, even if he died on the battlefield, he would never run away. If such a thing really happened, there must be a reason behind it. No matter how suspicious Li Daocheng was, with his current strength, he didn't even have the right to speak, let alone investigate. Right now, he couldn't even protect himself. The reason Li Daocheng didn't fight with Zhao Peng in the duel was because he didn't want to expose himself. If people discovered that he had become stronger in such a short time, they would definitely be suspicious. Not to mention, the Federation Security Bureau would investigate him again. Zhang Honglai would probably use thunderous methods to strangle him in the cradle. Zhang Honglai was one of the best in the elite class. His cultivation was at the 6th level of qi refining. As a freshman, his future was limitless. Zhang Honglai was ranked 2nd in the elite class. In front of him was one of the 4 great clans of Blue Bay Star, the Hong family's crown prince, Hongwu. He was a cultivation maniac. Li Daocheng was very clear that Zhang Honglai would definitely see his duel with Zhao Peng. If he exposed himself too much, he would die faster. Li Daocheng would rather use despicable methods to win than win with dignity. Li Daocheng's guess was correct. From the very beginning, Zhang Honglai had been sitting in his Star Glory class spiritual floating vehicle, watching every move that was happening in the arena through the spiritual light screen that came with it. When he saw Zhao Peng being beaten to the ground by Li Daocheng, Zhang Honglai crushed the wine glass in his hand. Rice bucket, you can't even beat an idiot. Did you not bring your brain? You fell for such a despicable trick and still want to enter the elite class. Zhao Peng, you think too highly of yourself. Oomph. Zhang Honglai coldly snorted. He didn't want to watch anymore. He turned off the screen and hugged the sexy woman sitting next to him and kissed her fiercely. Young Master Zhang, be gentle. You're hurting me, the sexy woman said shyly. Slap. Zhang Honglai swung his hand and slapped her. The sexy woman was frightened. She covered her face and looked at Zhang Honglai with tears in her eyes. Bitch, if you're afraid of pain, don't get in my car. Do you think you're the #1 beauty in Tianyuan City? Stop pretending to be pure. Zhang Honglai grabbed the sexy woman's hair and said fiercely. As the young master of the Zhang family, Zhang Honglai could have any woman he wanted. He changed the women around him one after another, trying to stop himself from thinking about Xiao Shimo. However, what he couldn't get was always the best. The frequent changes made his desire to get Xiao Shima even more fervent. Whenever he thought about how Xiao Shima was that idiot's fiancée, Zhang Honglia's heart bled. Xiao Shima, you're mine. No one can take you away from me. Whoever tries to take you away from me will die. Jean Honglie's eyes spat fire. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Bang! Jean Honglie kicked the sexy woman out of the car. He spread out a stack of Federation coins and drove away. In the duel arena, Li Daocheng raised the rock in his hand and aimed it at Zhao Peng's head. Even if he didn't die, he wanted to completely cripple him to prevent future troubles. Chapter 21. Li Daocheng felt a stinging pain in his arm after being hit. He turned around and saw Qiao Shima glaring at him from below the ring. He's already passed out. There's no need to kill him. Qiao Shima tried to speak as calmly as possible. She was extremely annoyed. If Li Daocheng really killed someone in public, he would definitely be taken away by the local Cultivation Security Bureau. He would either be sentenced or locked up in a mental hospital. Either way, the wedding between Qiao Shima and Li Daocheng on the 16th of next month would be ruined. The Qiao family had already started preparing for the wedding and was going to announce it to the public at the end of the month. Everything was going according to plan. Qiao Shima didn't come to school in the morning. She was in her 4th year, and her main task for the semester was to do her internship and finish her graduation thesis. Qiao Shima majored in finance and trade. She was in the economics department, not the cultivation department. However, all trades and professions were inseparable from cultivation. Cultivation was the foundation, so Qiao Shima was at the 7th level of qi refinement. However, she wasn't good at fighting. Cultivation was mainly for the sake of obtaining spirit energy so that she could operate the spirit brain. Qiao Shima went back to the dormitory at noon to pick up her things, but as soon as she arrived, she heard about Li Daocheng's duel. Qiao Shima immediately rushed to the duel arena. She had been worried that Li Daocheng would be crippled. If he was really crippled, how could he get married next month? Who would have thought that the scene she saw when she arrived was different from what she had imagined? Li Daocheng was actually riding on someone and smashing them with a brick. Qiao Shima secretly sighed in relief, but quickly realized that something was wrong. Li Daocheng seemed to have gone crazy and showed no signs of stopping. Someone below the ring stopped Li Daocheng. This guy actually said that he was mentally ill and that killing people wasn't illegal. Qiao Shima had no choice but to strike the stone out of Li Daocheng's hand. Qiao Shima's ability couldn't penetrate the spirit wave wall, but she had a habit of carrying offensive rune cards with her, mainly for self-defense. The Qiao family had bought these rune cards in the underground city. There were fire, ice, and thunder rune cards. Within the Shenghua Federation, rune cards with power level 2 and above were prohibited from being traded. It was more or less the same as the sale of guns. In fact, a level 2 rune card's power was already very impressive. It could seriously injure a cultivator at the 3rd level of qi refinement. When it hit, Qiao Shima's appearance stunned everyone, causing a commotion among the surrounding students. Many male students stared blankly, their hearts surging. It was not common to see the number 1 beauty's elegant demeanor at such a close distance. Two. From, isn't Qiao Shima Li Daocheng's fiancé? That was in the past. Li Daocheng is nothing now. The Li family kicked him out a long time ago. Although the Qiao family isn't a big family, they definitely won't let Qiao Shima marry a trader's son. But I heard that they have an engagement. Li Tianyang gave the Qiao family a betrothal gift that could buy a city. Would the Qiao family be willing to give it up? What's there to be reluctant about? There are many big shots who want to marry Qiao Shima. The Li family isn't the only Blue Bay star. Now that Li Tianyang is dead, Li Daocheng is nothing. Qiao Shima only needs to say the word, and those big shots will give her whatever she wants. I didn't hear that they broke off the engagement. The Li family asked the Qiao family for betrothal gifts, but the Qiao family hasn't replied. Maybe the Qiao family is keeping their promise. Bullsh *T. If Qiao Shima and Li Daocheng get married, I'll livestream myself eating *T. Gossip was such a magical thing. It could attract a lot of attention, regardless of age. Li Daocheng looked up at Qiao Shima as she knocked the stone out of his hand. At that moment, his mind was racing. Li Daocheng was able to take Zhao Peng down because it wasn't enough to play dirty. During the whole process, he used 2 telekinetic attacks on Zhao Peng. Because he deliberately controlled the effects of the attacks, Zhao Peng shouldn't have noticed. If it weren't for those two telekinetic attacks, even if Li Daocheng used so many tricks, Zhao Peng wouldn't have been so easily subdued. Li Daocheng had said that he wanted to kill Zhao Peng, but if he really killed him in public, he would be in big trouble. Xiao Shima's intervention gave him a way out. If Zhao Peng really died, the people who wanted to deal with him would very likely conduct an autopsy. That way, the telekinetic attacks he used on Zhao Peng would be exposed. Li Daocheng knew very well that he couldn't give himself away now. Keeping a low profile was the way to go. He still had to bear the title of a fool. This was the best shield at the moment. Once exposed, it would be very troublesome. Li Daocheng didn't care about people like Zhang Honglai. What he was afraid of were the Federation's Cultivation Security Bureau and the people who framed his father, Li Tianyang. Li Daocheng couldn't deal with those people now. The reason he hadn't attracted attention now was because people didn't take him seriously at all. A fool was obviously nothing to worry about. But once Li Daocheng exposed that he wasn't completely powerless and was even hiding his strength, it was very likely that people with ulterior motives would make a move on him. In fact, Li Daocheng wasn't hiding his strength. In the past, his spirit meridians had dried up and his IQ was low. It was just that his soul had died and his other self had taken over. With the help of the hot-blooded level-up device, he had reached the peak of the 3rd level of Qi refining in such a short time. But others wouldn't see it that way. No one could cultivate to the 3rd level of Qi refining in just a few days. This speed was absolutely unimaginable and unprecedented. Others would only think that Li Daocheng had been pretending to be a fool and hiding his strength all this time. If Li Tianyang hadn't gotten into trouble, it wouldn't have mattered. Now that the rebels had betrayed the country and his son was hiding his strength, it would be a little thought-provoking. Li Daocheng wouldn't be able to explain himself even if he had 3 mouths. When the time came, he would really become the yellow mud in his crotch. Even if he wasn't shit, he would still be shit. If he exposed his strength now, it would be the same as throwing himself at the muzzle of a gun. It would be difficult for him to escape death. Li Daocheng had originally only planned to keep a low profile and develop. He didn't want to be in the limelight. It wouldn't be too late to think about it again when he reached the foundation establishment stage. But many times, even if you didn't provoke others, others would provoke you. He couldn't stand the fact that he had a fiancée who was the most beautiful woman in the world. Fights between men were all for women. There was no way to avoid it. Zhang Honglai appeared out of nowhere. Trouble came one after another. Whether it was Gang Shui or Zhao Peng, they were all Zhang Honglia's bullets. For some unknown reason, Zhao Peng had gone crazy and wanted to kill him. He had even threatened him with a silver bottle. If not for that, Li Daocheng wouldn't have challenged Zhao Peng to a duel in public. But now that things had come to this, Li Daocheng could only maintain his original self and continue to pretend to be a cripple whose spirit meridians had dried up. Fortunately, he had maintained his behavior for the past few days. It was only when he demanded an exorbitant price from Xiao Shima and when he went to the underground city with Ouyang Qian that he was a little out of character. Playing dirty in the duel with Zhao Peng was unexpected. It didn't seem like something a fool would do. But a fool's occasional, unexpected behavior wouldn't be too shocking. As the saying goes, fools don't play by the rules when they do stupid things. Besides, his predecessor had done a few seemingly smart things in the past. Of course, that was because he would occasionally make a cameo appearance. Therefore, Li Daocheng wasn't worried that others would suspect him of playing dirty in the duel. His sudden increase in strength would truly attract attention. Moreover, his predecessor didn't really get the nickname of a fool because he was stupid. Even if his IQ was low, he would still be considered a normal person. The real reason people thought he was a fool was because the 9 basic spirit meridians in his body had withered since birth. Without spirit energy to nourish his brain, there was no way for him to develop. In this world where everyone had spirit meridians, those without spirit meridians were fools. In addition, his predecessor would drool whenever he saw a woman. These 2 reasons combined were why people called him a fool behind his back. Li Daocheng clearly knew that after today's duel, If he wanted to continue to develop in a low-key manner, he would have to maintain his predecessor's style of doing things. Otherwise, he would be exposed. Xiao Shima saw that Li Daocheng didn't respond and only stared at her. She couldn't help but frown and say, "Why aren't you coming down?" Li Daocheng stared blankly at Xiao Shima and drooled. He stared at her and giggled foolishly. Just like before, he would go crazy whenever he saw a beautiful woman. Hee hee, Shima, you're here. Okay, I'll come down. I'll come down right now. Li Daocheng excitedly stood up from the unconscious Zhao Peng and jogged to the edge of the arena to turn off the isolation glyph array. He slipped down the stage and continued to giggle foolishly in front of Xiao Shima. Sure enough, he was still a fool. She had thought too much last time. Xiao Shima frowned and looked at Li Daocheng. She really wanted to keep a distance from him, but she couldn't. In half a month, the family would announce the wedding date to the public. With so many people watching, no matter how much she hated this fool, she couldn't show it. The Li family wasn't so easy to fool. If the Li family found out about the fake marriage, the Qiao family would be finished. She would also likely become a lamb at the slaughter. There were many people who wanted to take her to bed. The Li family included a few. Xiao Shima often wished that she wasn't the #1 beauty. There was nothing wrong with being an ordinary woman. If it weren't for her face, Li Tianyang wouldn't have chosen her to be his daughter-in-law out of all the other girls. Those children of the big families wouldn't invite her to dinner every day. She wouldn't have so much trouble. Her face was now the benchmark of Tianyuan City's disguise parlors. A large number of women wanted to disguise themselves as her. Who could understand the pain in the heart of the #1 beauty? You're not hurt, are you? Xiao Shima looked at Li Daocheng and asked. This was the truth. After all, they had played together when they were young. She hated him because he was not only stupid, but also unambitious. Wasn't there a saying that the clumsy bird flies first? Stupidity wasn't an excuse to eat and wait for death. If Li Daocheng had a little ambition, Xiao Shima wouldn't have minded marrying him. Even if Li Tianyang had that kind of thing, Xiao Shima wouldn't dislike Li Daocheng because of it. She was the kind of woman who would be duty-bound to a person once she had decided on him. Unfortunately, Li Daocheng wasn't the kind of person she could entrust her life to. This guy didn't only show this expression of wanting to eat swan meat when he saw her. It seemed that as long as he saw a woman with a bit of beauty, he would be like this. I'm injured, Li Daocheng immediately replied. He even cried out, ouch. Where? Xiao Shima was a little worried. She didn't want it to affect the wedding. Chapter 22. Li Daocheng's silly actions caused the crowd to roar with laughter. Xiao Shima's pretty face reddened in embarrassment, and she really wanted to kick him out. Wife, won't you rub it for me? Li Daocheng asked shamelessly. Li Daocheng, that's enough. Stop fooling around. So many people are watching. Xiao Shima lowered her voice and begged for mercy. Li Daocheng, who was playing the fool, didn't want to make things difficult for Xiao Shima, so he straightened up and was about to say something. Just then, a floating car flew over and landed in the dueling arena. It was the school's medical floating car. Two people got out and carried the unconscious Zhao Peng into the car. Another person also got out of the car. The appearance of this person caused the surrounding students to cry out in surprise. This person was Xiansong University's all-powerful figure, the president of the student council, Zhao Wujin. He was the absolute king of the cultivation department's third-year superclass, and was at the middle stage of the Qi gathering, only one step away from the late stage of the Qi gathering. Zhao Wujin had a very high prestige among the students of Xiansong University, and the lecturers valued him very much. He was seen as the savior of Xiansong University's current position. Last year, Zhao Wujin had relied on his own strength to fight his way into the top 10 in the 4th Ring Star Zone's 100 schools joint examination. He was the only student to do so. Zhao Wujin had ended up in 7th place. But in the 4th Ring Star Zone of the Federation, he received more attention than anyone else in the top 5. This was because he was the only student in the middle stage of the Qi gathering among the top 10 in the joint examination. The others were all at the peak stage of the Qi gathering and were about to reach the foundation establishment stage. Xiansong University was one of the key universities of the Tsinghua Federation's Project 199. In recent years, the number of students at Xiansong University had withered. For 7 years in a row, no one had entered the top 10 of the fourth ring star zone's 100-school joint entrance examination. The last time someone had done so was 7 years ago. That year, a total of 3 students from Profound Firmament University had entered the top 10. Profound Firmament University had been so glorious that year. That year, Xiansong University's 3 geniuses had shone brilliantly and attracted a lot of attention. Xiansong University would have been removed from Project 199 by the Federation and become an ordinary university. The so-called Project 199 was, in fact, the 199 cultivation universities that the Tsinghua Federation had allocated funds to cultivate. However, these 199 universities were not fixed forever. Every 3 years, the Education Bureau of the Federation would evaluate the 199 universities. 7 years ago, due to the appearance of the 3 great geniuses, Xiansong University was ranked in the top 100 of Project 199. But after that, their ranking would drop every year. Last year, they had already dropped to 189th place. If it weren't for the sudden appearance of Zhao Wujin, Profound Heaven University would have definitely been kicked out of Project 199 this year. There was still half a year before the fourth ring star region's 100 schools joint examination, which was held once a year, would be held again. Carrying the hopes of more than 30,000 teachers and students of Xiansong University, Zhao Wujin would aim for first place in the joint examination of 100 schools. Once they successfully reached the top, Xiansong University's evaluation by the end of this year would definitely be greatly improved, and they would no longer have to worry about falling out of Project 199. The school board of directors had already ordered that they must assist Zhao Wujin in his cultivation at all costs. Dropping out of Project 199 meant that they would no longer enjoy the Federation's funding and would no longer focus on the construction. Their resources would be greatly reduced. It was very likely that the school would never recover from this setback. Of course, in addition to Zhao Wujin, Profound Heaven University had received a lot of talented freshmen in the super class last year. Yi Feiyue and Duan Yao were both at level 8 of the Qi refinement realm when they entered school. Even in the super class, this was quite rare, and they were considered geniuses among geniuses. Zhan Honglai and Han Wu from the elite class were also quite strong. At the end of this year, Profound Heaven University would send out a super luxurious lineup to participate in the joint examination of 100 schools. The school board of directors had set the goal of having 2 of them in a row. As soon as Zhao Wujin got out of the car, he walked straight up to Li Daochong. "You're Li Daochong?" Li Daochong looked puzzled. "What's the matter?" Several girls who were closer to them glared at Li Daochong when they saw that Li Daochong was actually speaking to their idol Zhao Wujin in such a casual tone. Zhao Wujin smiled. "Of course, but I have to confirm your identity, even though the spiritual computer has already shown that it's you." Li Daochong looked confused. "What's the matter?" Zhao Wujin handed over a spirit card. "This is your reward for winning the duel. This card has 1,000 Federation coins and your identity as a third-class soldier in the Federation's cultivation army. As long as you're willing, you can join the army at any time. Of course, if you're not willing, you can continue to study. After graduation, the military industry will have priority in opening its doors to you." Li Daochong took the spirit card in a daze. "There's such a benefit." Zhao Wujin maintained a smile on his face. The rules of a duel were set by the ancestors. "Since you won the duel, this is what you deserve. All right, my mission is complete. Goodbye." After saying this, Zhao Wujin turned around and entered the medical floating car. With a whoosh, the car flew into the sky, leaving behind a group of stupefied students. "Wow, Zhao Wujin is so handsome. I feel like I'm in love." Stop dreaming. With your bucket-like waist, forget Zhao Wujin. Even little Wang from the next class wouldn't be interested in you. If you ask me, Qiao Shima and Zhao Wujin are more compatible. The 2 girls conversed as if there was no one else around. Because they were very close, the contents of their conversation inevitably reached Qiao Shima and Li Daocheng's ears. The former sighed inwardly, while the latter pretended not to hear. Xiao Shima looked at Li Daocheng, fantasizing that if this kid was 1/10 of Zhao Wujin, she would be satisfied. Unfortunately, Xiao Shima looked at Li Daocheng, who was foolishly playing with the spirit card that Zhao Wujin had given him. There was no harm without comparison. Li Daocheng, I have an internship in the afternoon. Don't cause trouble for now. When I finish my graduation thesis at the end of the month, you can come live at my house. Xiao Shima's voice wasn't loud, but many students around her heard it. This news was like a bomb that exploded in the crowd. What? Did I hear wrongly? Xiao Shima actually took the initiative to ask Li Daocheng to live at her house. Damn, Xiao Shima isn't really going to marry this idiot, is she? Li Daocheng put away the spirit card and made a face at the students who were talking about it. Then, he looked at Xiao Shima with shining eyes and said, "Why don't you go live at her house today?" Shameless. Despicable. Some people couldn't help but curse. Li Daocheng turned a deaf ear to them. Seeing that Xiao Shima had left, he whistled and strode out of the school. After he was far away from the crowd, Li Daocheng put away his sloppy and silly expression and felt tired. It wasn't easy to dress up like this. After all, there was a big difference between his old self and this style. There were no classes in the afternoon, so Li Daocheng didn't plan to go to the library. He wanted to walk around the underground city. When Li Daocheng walked to the boulevard, Zhang Honglai came up to him and blocked Li Daocheng's path. Li Daocheng pretended not to see and continued to walk around him. Zhang Honglai also moved and blocked Li Daocheng's path, not letting him pass. Li Daocheng expected that Zhang Honglai wouldn't let him go, but he didn't expect him to come looking for trouble so soon. The 6th level of Qi refining was a whole different level. Li Daocheng was a little scared, but he couldn't lose his momentum. He said, "A good dog doesn't block the way." Bang! Zhang Honglai suddenly stepped forward and bumped into Li Daocheng. Li Daocheng felt a huge force hit him. He couldn't resist at all. He staggered a few steps back and sat on the ground. Sorry, I walked too fast and didn't see. Are you okay?" Zhang Honglai stepped forward and grabbed Li Daocheng's arm to help him up. Li Daocheng was secretly at a disadvantage. He didn't have anyone to reason with. Zhang Honglai didn't hit him. He just bumped into him while walking. Li Daocheng wanted to curse and get back at him, but Zhang Honglai pulled his arm. Chapter 23. Li Daocheng groaned as a hidden force entered his body. His chest felt tight, and his head felt dizzy. Scum, if you don't want to die, then stay away from Xiao Shima. Otherwise, your fate will be even worse than your father's. Oh, that's right. I think that Kanu girl is quite pretty. She suits this young master's taste. If I have the chance, I must taste her. Zhang Honglai helped Li Daocheng up and lowered his head to whisper into his ear, his tone full of disdain. You? Li Daocheng had just spat out a word when another hidden force entered his body. His chest felt tight, and he was short of breath, unable to speak. Learn from your father. When it's time to run, you should run. After all, where there's life, there's hope. Dead scum. Zhang Honglai mocked. Li Daocheng endured the pain and looked straight at Zhang Honglai, expressionless and silent. I'll give you a week to announce that your engagement with Xiao Shima is annulled. At that time, I'll give you 500,000 Federation coins as a reward. If I don't hear the news within a week, don't blame me for being rude. Zhang Honglai said coldly. After saying that, Zhang Honglai pushed Li Daocheng away, snorted coldly, and turned to leave. Li Daocheng staggered a few steps. His left arm hung limply, unable to move. His back was already soaked in sweat. Was this the 6th level of Qi refining? Sure enough, they weren't on the same level. The gap between them was too big. Now that he was facing Zhang Honglai with real weapons, he couldn't resist at all. 1 week, huh? Li Daocheng's lips curled up slightly. Maybe it was enough. Li Daocheng dragged his dislocated arm out of the school gate and found a small hospital to reattach it. The dislocated area was still a bit uncomfortable and wasn't as flexible as before. Li Daocheng immediately realized that Zhang Honglai had done something to him. He was afraid that the dislocated shoulder wasn't as simple as it seemed. Li Daocheng didn't have time to go to a big hospital to diagnose the injury. He first went home, took the bone cleaver, and drove his shabby spirit float toward the underground city. On the way, Li Daocheng's expression was frozen. The pain in his shoulder grew stronger and stronger, as if it could dislocate again at any time. Li Daocheng's movements toward the underground city were basically mechanical. He had already planned to walk around the underground city this afternoon and see if he could find a way to buy low-level Dark Ghost. However, after being intercepted by Zhang Honglai and suffering a loss, Li Daocheng realized that the gap between them was much larger than he had imagined. Even if he had the hot-blooded upgrader, the necessary condition to level up was to absorb Dark Ghosts. But where would he find so many Dark Ghosts? The more time passed, the more soul energy he would need to absorb. Li Daocheng felt that he couldn't see any hope, that he couldn't see the light, and his mood was extremely low. A few days ago, everything had been going too smoothly, and he had thought that he could sit back and relax. Only after meeting Zhang Honglai did he realize that the gap between them was enormous. If he couldn't even deal with Zhang Honglai, how was he supposed to investigate his father's matter? Not to mention become the strongest cultivator. Wasn't that just a pipe dream? Li Daocheng felt that he was very laughable. He hadn't thought much of Zhang Honglai before. In truth, the other could kill him with a single finger. Li Daocheng was momentarily at a loss, unable to find his way. The pain from his shoulder constantly stimulated his pain receptors, slowly destroying the softness in his heart. Zhang Honglai alone was already so difficult to deal with. Those people who had framed his father were even more difficult to deal with. To be able to frame a Jindan cultivator, their strength was obvious. And those paranoid fellows from the Federation Security Bureau were also watching him. They believed that he must know something about Li Tianyang's escape. But Li Daocheng really didn't know anything. These three factions were each stronger than the last, each more terrifying than the last. He was just a stupid kid who had been abandoned by his family. What would he use to fight them? Li Daocheng felt like a hungry dragon was looking down on him, its bloody maw opening bit by bit, about to swallow him whole. An ear-piercing whistle sounded. Li Daocheng came back to his senses and saw a few floating cars speeding towards him. Seeing that they were about to collide, he fiercely swung the control stick and narrowly avoided them. Li Daocheng broke out in a cold sweat. If he had collided with them, he would have died. The pain in his shoulder became intense, and he had no choice but to stop the floating car. Huff, huff. Li Daocheng gasped for breath. He lay on his back and closed his eyes. His nerves made him feel very tired. Just as he closed his eyes, Li Daocheng found that he was no longer in the floating car. Instead, he had returned to the room where he had spent countless nights typing on the keyboard and programming code. On the wall in front of him, there was a line of large words written with a marker facing him. A person must have some goals and dreams in life. Otherwise, he is just a walking feces machine. The line of words took form and let out a burst of mocking laughter. Hee hee, you're afraid of such a small difficulty? Don't you want to be the strongest cultivator? Forget it, don't be. Just be a feces machine. At least you don't have to face difficulties. Hee hee, you're a walking feces machine. No. Li Daocheng roared and shouted, I am not. Li Daocheng suddenly opened his eyes. He was still sitting in the passenger seat of the floating car. The car was parked next to a rice paddy field. A red-oiled pig was eating weeds by the side of the field. Puff, puff. The fat pig was eating and shitting at the same time. It was perfect for fertilizing the rice paddy field. Two agricultural cultivators came out of the paddy field, laughing. One of them said, This one is fat and thick. We can slaughter it. Not bad, not bad. We'll take it. The other person nodded. Two agricultural cultivators tied a rope around the pig's head and pulled it back to where they came from. The pig was still snorting and swaying as it ate. It didn't seem to know that its death was near. It lowered its head and continued to eat the weeds. When it passed by the field, it shat again. The agricultural cultivators dragged the pig to an agricultural floating car in the field. Immediately, there was a miserable cry. It quickly quieted down, and minced meat and blood came out from the other side. It ate, drank, shat, slept, and then was slaughtered. It was muddle-headed, not thinking about the road ahead, not looking for the future. It was only waiting to be slaughtered. The feces machine's life was over. Li Daocheng, who happened to see the entire slaughtering process, was stunned. In an instant, he was enlightened. He couldn't help but clench his fists. His cold eyes suddenly emitted a touch of determination that had never been there before. "I'm not a feces machine," Li Daocheng roared. He thought back to when he was learning to program. At first, he didn't know anything. He was confused, hesitant, and even thought of giving up. But in the end, he relied on his initial dream to create the most desirable mobile game. He persevered and became one of the top programmers in the country. There was nothing in the world that was impossible if one set his mind to it. Although the saying was old, there were very few people who could do it. When I wanted to be a programmer, I was poor. Now I have the hot-blooded upgrader. With such good conditions, I'm still confused about the future. What a bastard. Li Daocheng cursed himself in his heart. He started the floating pickup and sped toward the underground city. At this moment, the floating pickup was moving more smoothly than it had ever been before. Half an hour later, Li Daocheng entered the underground city. The streets of the underground city were dark and damp. The people on the streets were all wearing cloaks, unwilling to reveal their true faces. Although it was Li Daocheng's second time here, he was still unfamiliar with the place. He walked along the street for a while before he found a place that looked like a market. There were many vendors gathered here. On the two sides of the street, there was a tarpaulin. There were many strange items for sale on the tarpaulin. There were also some hand carts. From time to time, someone would shout. Chapter 24. Li Daocheng's attention was attracted by one of the hawkers selling soul crystals. What was a soul crystal? Simply put, a soul crystal was a ghost egg. What was a ghost egg? A ghost egg was the egg that hatched a nether ghost. Hades' ghost demons didn't appear out of thin air. Apart from their different forms, they were the same. When a female ghost and a male ghost married, the crystallization of their love was a soul crystal. The soul crystals contained extremely pure soul power, which was of great help to human cultivators. They had a similar effect to spirit stones. However, due to the presence of death chi within them, one had to first remove the death chi when using the soul crystals to cultivate. Thus, low-grade soul crystals were much more useful than spirit stones, but they couldn't be used directly. Moreover, in the process of removing the death aura, the soul energy contained in them could be greatly reduced or even completely eliminated. Thus, soul crystals were difficult to sell for a good price, and the way to obtain them was also dangerous. Normally, very few people would sell them. To cultivators who had just entered the sect, they were of little value. However, Li Daocheng was immediately tempted when he heard the seller. He wasn't sure if this thing could be absorbed. "Boss, 500 for one. Are you selling?" Li Daocheng stepped forward and asked. Due to the uncertainty, Li Daocheng didn't want to spend too much money. If it didn't work, it would be a waste of money. Even if Li Daocheng had 250,000 to spend, he didn't have a stable income, so he had to be frugal. A large portion of this money was to be used by Li Daocheng to pay for the next semester's tuition. He was also preparing to buy a large courtyard in the slums. Yinping had suffered too much over the years, so Li Daocheng really wanted to do something for her. 500? Friend, are you joking with me? I spent a lot to obtain these soul crystals. The cost was 800. You have to let me make a profit. I can't make a loss. 900 is the minimum. The young seller had a sincere expression. Then forget it. Li Daocheng didn't really want it, so he turned around and left. Hey friend, how about this? Let's not waste time. I don't want this thing anymore. I'll sell it to you at cost price. 800 yuan for one. That's the lowest price. The young stall owner compromised. The soul crystals have too much death chi. If you use them for cultivation, you'll have to get rid of the death chi. If you're not careful, you'll lose that bit of soul power as well. It'll be good if 1 out of 3 soul crystals can be used. I'll take them for 500 soul crystals each. Li Daocheng replied indifferently. Then, he turned to leave. His expression was as if he didn't really need it. If you want to sell it, then sell it. If you don't want to sell it, then forget it. Li Daocheng turned around and took 2 steps. Hey, Friend, wait a moment. I still have 5 more in my bag. There are 8 in total. If you can eat all of them, 500 it is. I'll sell it to you at a loss, said the young stall owner. Li Daochong stopped and turned around. He glanced at the young stall owner. His bargaining method of cutting the price in half was definitely ruthless enough. The normal price of soul crystals was around 1,200 soul crystals. The young stall owner's price was slightly lower than the market price. Li Daochong had only bargained for 500 soul crystals because he wanted to buy one to test it out. If it didn't work, he would just treat it as paying tuition. He didn't intend to buy so many. Although the young stall owner had been bargaining for a while, he appeared to be very eager to sell these soul crystals. Li Daochong's face remained expressionless. However, a trace of suspicion arose in his heart. Could these be fake soul crystals? Show me one. Li Daochong turned around and walked to the front of the stall. The young stall owner didn't dawdle. He directly took out a soul crystal and handed it to Li Daochong. Most of the soul crystals were only half the size of a fist. They had an irregular shape and were completely black. They looked like freshly unearthed crystal mines. That was why they were called soul crystals. Friend, honesty is the key to doing business. Don't worry. These soul crystals are all Ghost Apprentice level. I have a friend who is a retired veteran. These soul crystals were purchased from the soldiers who had just returned from the front line. Every one of them is genuine. The young stall owner saw Li Daochong carefully observing the soul crystals. He knew that this young man was most likely doubting the authenticity of the soul crystals. After all, 500 soul crystals was too low. Hence, he explained, Li Daochong took the soul crystal and injected a trace of spiritual energy into it. He didn't listen to the young stall owner at all. Li Daochong didn't want to look at the goods. He just wanted to see if the hot-blooded upgrader would react to the soul crystals. If there was no reaction, he wouldn't want it no matter if it was genuine or fake. He would save 500 soul crystals. There was no reaction when the spiritual energy entered the soul crystal. Li Daochong frowned. It seemed that it was useless. This thing didn't work on him. After thinking about it, Li Daochong began to withdraw his spiritual energy. He was about to return the soul crystal to the young stall owner and say that he didn't want it when his body shook slightly. Soul power obtained. After thinking for a moment, Li Daochong immediately felt the spiritual energy in his body increase. Although it wasn't a lot, he could still feel it. The young stall owner looked at Li Daochong nervously, afraid that Li Daochong wouldn't want it. Seeing this young man frown when he looked at the soul crystal, the young stall owner felt a little discouraged. It seemed that Li Daochong didn't want it anymore. Boss, take out the remaining 7 soul crystals. I want them. Li Daochong's slightly frozen expression suddenly relaxed as he said, Okay. The young stall owner was stunned for a moment. Then, he happily replied. He immediately took out the other 7 soul crystals from the bag and handed them to Li Daochong. Li Daochong immediately transferred the money to the young stall owner. He then left with the bag containing the 7 soul crystals. After leaving the bazaar, Li Daochong entered the floating pickup and immediately absorbed all 7 soul crystals. A series of soul power obtained. Notifications sounded. Finally, there was a beep. Soul power obtained. Host has leveled up to level 4. After absorbing all 8 soul crystals, Li Daochong, who was originally at the peak of the 3rd stage of qi refining, finally leveled up and entered the 4th stage of qi refining. The other exhausted spirit vein in his body also expanded. However, it wasn't as moist and elastic as the first one. Li Daochong's vision became a little clearer. The increase in spiritual energy not only improved his depressed mood, but also made his body feel a lot lighter. Of the 9 exhausted spirit veins, 1.5 had now recovered. Li Daochong was overjoyed. However, Li Daochong didn't get to be happy for long. The pain in his left shoulder pulled him back to reality. The hidden energy left by Zhan Honglai hadn't been relieved in the slightest because of his breakthrough. Li Daochong clenched his teeth and got out of the car. He returned to the bazaar. Just now, he saw a shop on the street with a sign hanging above it. There were 4 very eye-catching words on the sign. Guaranteed to cure all diseases. Li Daocheng didn't quite believe that this kind of medical clinic was selling dogskin plasters. However, the pain in his shoulder was really unbearable. Li Daocheng felt that it was necessary to take a look. Although the underground city couldn't see the light of day, legends about the underground city had always been circulating in the underworld. Thinking about it, even if there was a dogskin plaster here, it should be different. After all, people who could survive in the underground city would have been killed long ago if they didn't have some skills. One had to know that the underground city was the gathering place of all kinds of Blue Bay Star's underworld forces. Even the local government of Blue Bay Star was somewhat afraid of this place and turned a blind eye to many things. Any random person walking on the streets of the underground city might be a wanted criminal on a certain planet. Li Daocheng had just walked to the door of the shop when he heard a familiar shout. "Don't miss this chance. If you miss this chance, see you next year." 3 soul crystals. Starting price, 1,000 Federation dollars each. The young stall owner who had just sold 8 soul crystals to him was shouting for soul crystals again. Li Daocheng frowned. Didn't he just say that there were only 8 soul crystals? Why was he selling them again? Li Daocheng was puzzled. Suddenly, his arm was wrapped by something soft. He turned his head and saw a beautiful nurse wearing a white nurse uniform with a wide open collar, holding his arm and looking at him with a smile. Chapter 25. The sexy nurse's enthusiasm made Li Daocheng feel a bit unnatural. He wasn't used to being so intimate with a strange woman. Li Daocheng temporarily put away his curiosity about the young stall owner. He calmly pulled his arm out of the nurse's embrace and said, "I'm here to see a doctor." The nurse pulled Li Daocheng closer to the shop. "Where do you feel uncomfortable?" "My shoulder," Li Daocheng replied. But as soon as the words left his mouth, he felt that something was wrong. The nurse closed the shop's door while she was asking, "Handsome, I'll help you rub it." The nurse closed the door and almost threw herself at Li Daocheng. Li Daocheng had just reached the 4th level of qi refinement. His 5 senses had improved to a certain extent. He moved his body to avoid the nurse. The nurse rushed forward and leaned on the table in the middle of the shop. The nurse wasn't angry. She turned her face and looked at Li Daocheng. "Handsome, you like this? Do you want to play a game of cat and mouse?" Li Daocheng frowned. "What cat and mouse? Is there no doctor here other than you?" The nurse was puzzled. "Doctor? What doctor?" Li Daocheng's voice turned cold. "If there's no doctor, what illness can I treat? Are you kidding me?" The nurse's pretty face showed displeasure. "I'm kidding you? Handsome, you're kidding me, right? Why did you come here? Are you deliberately making fun of me?" Li Daocheng didn't understand the nurse's words at all. He didn't want to talk nonsense. He turned around and left. But the door was locked. He couldn't open it. "What do you mean? You're not letting me leave?" Li Daocheng suddenly realized that he might have entered a scam shop. "Of course not. If you want to leave, leave after you finish your business," the nurse said as she gave him a coquettish look. She swayed her slender waist and walked towards Li Daocheng. She took off her clothes as she walked. No matter how stupid Li Daocheng was, seeing the nurse's behavior, he knew what kind of place he had entered. Screw you. This so-called medicine shop that could cure all diseases was actually a chicken coop. So that was what it meant when it said that it could cure all illnesses. The nurse quickly took off her coat, leaving only her underwear on. Her smooth, snow-white skin was exposed to the air. Li Daocheng was full of vigor. It would be a lie if he said that he didn't feel anything. However, Li Daocheng didn't have much of a preference for women. It would be wonderful if the two of them were in love, but if it was just to satisfy their desires, then forget it. The nurse rushed forward, but Li Daocheng dodged again. The baby-faced nurse finally became a little impatient. She tried her best to suppress her impatience and seduced him with a flirtatious look. "Handsome, come on, I want it." Li Daocheng remained unmoved. If it wasn't for the pain in his left shoulder that prevented him from moving freely, that attack wouldn't have hit him. Li Daocheng was now most confident in his combat skills. The basic cultivation method was really too useful. In a fist and foot fight, As long as it wasn't strength or cultivation, Li Daocheng was confident that he wouldn't be able to take advantage of anyone. The female ghost's figure swayed again. She charged at him like a ghost. Li Daocheng only had one hand. He had to constantly resist the pain. His actual combat ability was greatly reduced. Seeing the female ghost charge at him, he turned around and ran upstairs. He wanted to see if there was a window or something he could jump out of. But as soon as he got upstairs, Li Daocheng regretted it. It was pitch black upstairs. There wasn't even a crack, let alone a window. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that there was a pair of green eyes floating in the darkness. There was another nether ghost? Li Daocheng was dumbfounded. Weren't there many experts in the underground city? How could two nether ghosts hide here so easily? Whoosh! The ghostly figure charged up from below, fierce and hurried. Li Daocheng turned around a block, but was sent flying again with a bang, crashing into the wardrobe. Save me, save me. Li Daocheng could faintly hear someone calling for help. It seemed to be in the closet, but there was no time for him to save anyone. The female ghost had charged again, and so did the two floating green eyes in the darkness. Li Daocheng clenched his teeth. Instead of blocking or dodging, he charged at the female ghost and hugged her. The moment he hugged her, Li Daocheng poured his spiritual energy into the nurse's body. Almost at the same time, Li Daocheng felt pain in the critical part of his left shoulder. There was a hidden force inside, and something was biting him on the outside. Li Daocheng couldn't care less about his shoulder. He poured all the spiritual energy in his body into the possessed nurse. Her delicate body paused and didn't react. Then she began to twist and roll violently, trying to throw Li Daocheng off her body. Li Daocheng wasn't willing to let go. He didn't know what level the female ghost was at, but he couldn't beat her with only one arm. He could only use his spiritual energy and the hot blood upgrader to destroy her. Li Daocheng was sure that the level of this female ghost was much higher than the black resentment binding spirit that possessed the middle-aged man last time. But this female ghost wasn't wrapped in miasma. As soon as it came into contact with Li Daocheng's spiritual energy, it was as if it was burned. There wasn't much resistance before it was absorbed by the hot blood upgrader. Li Daocheng only felt the spiritual energy in his body increase crazily. Beep! Killed one spirit ghost. The prompt was very short. It didn't say that Li Daocheng had leveled up. Li Daocheng couldn't help but be shocked. He felt that the amount of spiritual energy he absorbed this time was definitely the most he had ever absorbed. Why couldn't he level up? How much soul power did he need to reach the 5th level of the Qi refinement stage? It was actually a spirit ghost. Li Daocheng was secretly relieved. It was the most intelligent type of ghost among the Ghost Apprentice stage dark ghosts. Squeak! Poochie! Li Daocheng turned his head and saw a strange creature on his left shoulder, gradually shriveling like a deflated balloon. Beep! Killed one demonic mouse. Soul power gained. Level 5. Li Daocheng's bite wound slowly healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The bite marks soon disappeared, and the spiritual energy in his body gathered into a thick fog. The second moistened spirit vein completely stretched out. Like the first spirit vein, it became very elastic and pulsated with Li Daocheng's heartbeat. The third spirit vein also recovered from its exhausted state and was no longer in a withered state. Demonic mouse? Ghost beast? Li Daocheng narrowed his eyes. Not only were there Ghost Apprentice stage dark ghosts, but there were also ghost beasts. Did something happen in the underground city? Help, help! Chapter 26. Li Daocheng opened the wardrobe door and saw a young man tied up inside. He had a confused expression, his eyes were cloudy, and there were many bruises on his body. His eyes were bloodshot, and his forehead was black. Could this be the real pharmacist of this medicine shop? Li Daocheng pulled the young man out. The light was so bright that the young man couldn't open his eyes. The young man's neck and arms were covered in tattoos. His face was wretched and shifty-eyed. No matter how one looked at him, he didn't look like a pharmacist or a doctor. The originally dense aura of death on the second floor gradually disappeared after Li Daochong killed the ghost and the demonic mouse. When Li Daochong pulled the young man out of the wardrobe, he was clearly in a state of dementia. He just kept repeating, "Help me mechanically," and his consciousness was very hazy. Li Daochong checked the young man's pulse. This guy was actually at the 3rd level of qi refinement, which surprised Li Daochong a little. After confirming that he wasn't possessed by the dark ghost, he got up and poured a cup of water for him. As the aura of death dissipated, the young man's cloudy eyes gradually regained vitality. He took the cup of water and drank it in big gulps. After drinking the cup of hot water, his condition improved a lot. Not long after, the aura of death in the room completely disappeared. The young man's consciousness was completely restored. He looked at Li Daochong with a face full of gratitude. "Big brother, thank you for saving my life. If it weren't for Big Brother, I would have definitely been killed by the people of the Blood Knife Society." Li Daochong didn't understand the last part. Blood Knife Society? What Blood Knife Society? This guy was clearly under the control of the ghost and the demonic mouse after being bewitched. Where did the Blood Knife Society come from? Although Li Daochong was a little confused, he had heard of the Blood Knife Society before. It was one of the 3 major gangs in the underground city. Gangs were called sects in the primitive cultivation era. At that time, they were everywhere. Cultivators also used them to pass down their legacies and develop. However, after the end of the feudal cultivation era, sects gradually stepped down from the stage of history. Nowadays, sects had almost disappeared and were replaced by major cultivation companies. The cultivation civilization had officially entered the era of highly developed capital cultivation. There were all kinds of cultivation companies, and only the underground forces of the gangs remained. There were dozens of big and small gangs gathered in the underground city. The Blood Knife Society was one of the 3 biggest gangs. The other 2 were called the Green Lotus Gang and the Shadow Serene Workshop. Li Daochong felt strange, but he couldn't directly tell this young man that he had been possessed. The Blue Bay Star was located in the 4th Ring Star sector, which was located in the rear. Only the 7th Ring Star sector was more chaotic, and there were basically no ghost incidents here. Moreover, there were as many experts as there were clouds in the underground city. If a nether ghost were to invade, how could such a low-level one not be discovered? Li Daochong told the young man the truth. Not only would this guy not believe him, he might even think that he was a spy from the Blood Knife Society. Li Daochong didn't change his expression. He didn't mention anything about the nether ghost. He casually asked a few other questions, and the young man answered them one by one with an expression that said he knew everything. He was really grateful to Li Daochong. After asking, Li Daochong quickly understood that this guy had been possessed. He didn't know what had really happened. In his opinion, the Blood Knife Society, a rival gang of the Shadow Serene Workshop, had come to cause trouble. 3 big men had rushed in and beaten him up. Then, they had tied him up and locked him in the closet. After that, he had fainted without knowing what had happened. In reality, none of this had happened. He had been in a state of delirium the whole time. This young man was called Shan Pao, and he was the manager of the brothel hall under the Shadow Serene Workshop. The Shadow Serene Workshop's main business was the underground auction house, but they also did some other businesses. The brothel hall was a brothel, and the manager of the brothel hall was a pimp. This medicine shop that could cure all kinds of diseases was just a cover. The hooligans and peddlers in the area all knew what this place did. Every day, many people would come looking for fun. In a place like the underground city, where would there be a proper medicine shop? The regular medicine on the market was all over the streets. There was no need to come to the underground city to buy it. Unorthodox or forbidden medicines could be found in the stalls of the major markets. Rare and precious medicines of a higher grade could only be bought at the Shadow Serene Workshop through auctions. It was Li Daochong's first time here, so he didn't know anything about this place. He really thought that this medicine shop was a medicine shop, but in the end, he made a mistake. He just happened to save this young man who was possessed by a ghost and almost had all of his essence sucked dry. However, Shan Pao didn't know that he had been possessed. Although he was at the 3rd level of qi refining, his foundation was not stable. He had just broken through. A spirit ghost was enough to make him lose his mind, not to mention the demon mouse, which was even more powerful than a spirit ghost. Low-level dark ghosts were nothing more than possession and confusion. Confusion was of a higher level than possession, but there was a limit. Possession was also risky for dark ghosts. If the possessed human's spiritual energy was strong, then the low-level dark ghost would be ejected and their spiritual energy would be damaged. In serious cases, they might even die. Confusion was different. There was no need to put oneself in danger. From Shan Pao's description, Li Daocheng knew that he had been bewitched by the demon mouse from the start and didn't know what had happened. Of course, Li Daocheng didn't plan on explaining the reason. In short, he had saved Shan Pao's life. As for whether he had saved him from a human or a ghost, since the person involved didn't remember, Li Daocheng couldn't be bothered to explain. Li Daocheng was just about to go to the Shadow Serene workshop to buy something and was worried about not knowing where it was. With Shan Pao's help, the problem was easily solved. Now that Shan Pao had escaped from death, he was extremely grateful to this young man in front of him. He was his savior. Shan Pao was still a little afraid of Li Daocheng. In his memory, the three men from the Blood Knife Society were all very strong. They were at least in the 4th level of Qi refining, and one of them was even in the 5th level. This young man didn't even look older than him, but he was able to fight off 3 people from the Blood Knife Society alone. It was clear that this young man was at least in the 6th level of Qi refining. The 6th level of Qi refining was a threshold. In the Shadow Serene workshop, those who could reach this level were at least Hall Masters. The underground city was a mix of good and bad. Everyone was smart. No one was willing to do things that didn't benefit them, let alone lend a helping hand. It was already good enough that they didn't take advantage of the situation. Shan Pao hadn't been in the Shadow Serene workshop for long. He had only seen the Vice Hall Masters. He had never seen a Hall Master before. When he looked at Li Daocheng, other than gratitude, there was also a hint of worship. Big brother, which gang are you from? The 3 Pure Ones or the Flying Shuttle Gang? Shan Pao asked in a grateful tone. Li Daocheng was about to ask, but Shan Pao took the initiative to speak first. Li Daocheng took advantage of the situation and replied, I'm a freelancer. I'm in the underground city to buy something. Oh, I was wondering why Big Brother was dressed so plainly. So you're from above. It's right to come to the underground city to buy something. What is Big Brother buying? Shan Pao continued asking. Someone from above? Li Daocheng sighed. He sounded like a dead man. Dark ghost. Li Daocheng purposely said directly, wanting to see Shan Pao's reaction. There was no reaction at all. Shan Pao's expression was normal, as if trading with dark ghosts wasn't a rare thing. Big brother, you've come to the right place to buy dark ghosts. Dwarf ghosts, dwarf elves, bound spirits, and ghost apprentices. Choose whatever you want. There are plenty of them in the Shadow Serene Square. If you want higher-level dark ghosts, you have to go to the Serene Tower. However, you don't have to be a member of the Shadow Serene Square to enter the Serene Tower. Otherwise, you can only buy items in the Shadow Serene Square, Shan Pao explained. There were even low-level dwarf ghosts for sale. Li Daocheng was overjoyed. As long as he had enough money, wouldn't he be able to continuously level up? Where's the Shadow Serene Square? Li Daocheng asked calmly, but he couldn't wait. Big brother, wait a moment. I'll bring you there. Although the Shadow Serene Square has more freedom, new faces can't enter without a referral. The Shadow Serene Square isn't interested in the identity of the customer. It's mainly to prevent the Security Bureau from inspecting, Shan Pao explained. At that moment, the unconscious female nurse on the ground woke up. She looked at Li Daocheng and Shan Pao in confusion. Clearly, she had no idea what had happened. Shan Pao casually got something to eat and took 2 bites. Then, he brought Li Daocheng out of the medicine shop. Once out the door, Li Daocheng immediately heard the shouts of people selling soul crystals. Chapter 27. Li Daocheng walked over curiously. The young vendor was a little embarrassed when he saw Li Daocheng. Boss, didn't you sell the last 8 to me just now? Why are you still hawking? Li Daocheng asked. This is called marketing. Do you understand? Go away. Don't get in the way of my business. The young stall owner looked at Li Daocheng with disdain. Little Ma, Can't you talk properly after not seeing me for a few days? Shan Pao's voice came from behind Li Daochong. When the young vendor saw Shan Pao, it was as if he saw a ghost. He rolled up his cloth in the small sack beside him and ran away. Shan Pao was stunned and felt that something was wrong. He picked up a hard object from the stall beside him and threw it at the young vendor's knee. After a scream, the young vendor did not fall down. He continued to limp and run away. Shan Pao called out to Li Daochong and chased after him. Li Daochong felt that it was strange and followed him. The young stall owner's knee was injured, so he could not run fast at all. Mountain Pao quickly caught him and pushed him into a dark, damp, and fishy alley by the street. A few black rats gathered together and gnawed on the food in the garbage. Why did you run when you saw me? Shan Pao pressed the young vendor's neck tightly. Cough, cough, Brother Pao, I didn't run. I was just closing my stall. The young vendor quibbled. Little Ma, you won't cry until you see the coffin. Shan Pao was angry when he saw that the young vendor refused to tell the truth. Xing! Shan Pao pulled out a dagger from his waist. The young vendor's tough expression withered like a deflated balloon. Brother Pao, don't. Let's talk nicely. At this time, Li Daochong, who had followed behind, picked up the small sack that the young stall owner had thrown on the ground. When he opened it, he gasped. There was a whole sack of soul crystals inside. There were at least 10 of them. So many ghost eggs? Li Daochong was standing beside Shan Pao. He also saw the sack full of soul crystals. He turned around and looked at the young stall owner in shock. Soul crystals weren't something rare. Most of the veterans who had retired from the front lines would have some in their hands. In addition, some of the crew members of the transport caravans would also have some. But generally, they would only have a few, at most a dozen. The conditions for dark ghosts to produce soul crystals were the same as humans. A male ghost and a female ghost had to do something indescribable. Female ghosts were pregnant, but they would usually give birth to a soul crystal in less than a month. At most, 3 soul crystals would be the limit. Dark ghosts would never gather together to produce soul crystals. He didn't have such a habit or tradition. It was not impossible to collect a sack of soul crystals. You would have to enter the Hades, reach the Nether Ghost Colony planet, and steal from door to door in the Ghost City. Who could be so capable? Thus, when Li Daochong and Shan Pao saw the sack of soul crystals, they were in disbelief. Li Daochong took out a soul crystal and casually probed it. Spirit Chi entered and was immediately absorbed by him. The soul crystal was real. He couldn't help but look up at the young vendor and ask in surprise, "Where did you get so many soul crystals?" The young vendor lowered his head and pretended not to hear. "Did you hear my big brother's question? Hurry up and answer," Shan Pao scolded angrily. The young vendor trembled and hesitated. He didn't want to say, but was also very afraid. "Are you deaf? Deaf ears are useless. Might as well chop them up and feed them to the rats," Shan Pao said impatiently. He raised his knife and chopped at the young vendor's ear. "Don't, Brother Pao. I'll talk." The young vendor saw that Shan Pao was serious and immediately cowered. Shan Pao's knife stopped less than an inch away from the young vendor's ear. "Speak." The young vendor gritted his teeth and said, "Brother Pao, yesterday when I passed by the back of Deadwood Castle, I saw something fall from the window. When I got closer, I saw that it was a soul crystal. I've been tight on money recently, so when I saw that it was something that could be sold for money, I opened the window. Who knew that a pile of soul crystals would fall out? I put all the soul crystals into a sack and sold them at the market today to earn some extra money." When Shan Pao heard the young vendor's words, he let go of him and said, "Scram." The young vendor was troubled. "Brother Pao, those soul crystals," Shan Pao's face was cold. "Can't you see that my big brother likes them?" "Scram." Li Daochong took out 5 spirit stones and gave them to the young vendor. "Since you picked them up, 5 spirit stones should be enough." The young vendor, who thought that he wouldn't get anything, quickly took the 5 spirit stones and nodded. "It's enough, it's enough." Then he limped away. "Big brother, what do you want these soul crystals for? These things are rather useless, and they could be used very little after being refined. It would be better to just refine a low-level dark ghost to obtain soul power." Shan Pao was completely uninterested in the sack of soul crystals, and he was rather perplexed by this. I have a friend who does research and needs a lot of soul crystals. Other than buying things for myself, I also want to bring some back with him. Li Daocheng casually found an excuse. Shan Pao didn't continue asking. He didn't know anything about learning. Li Daocheng followed Shan Pao west. After walking for about 20 minutes, they arrived in front of a broken tower. There were many people lining up in front of the tower. 2 guards were at the door, checking the identity of the people entering one by one. They used something like a flashlight to illuminate their eyes. Shan Pao led Li Daocheng to the back of the broken tower. Although the tower was broken, it was very large. There were only 5 floors in total, and the higher you went, the smaller it became. The first floor was more than 30 meters in diameter. The back door of the broken tower was where the employees of the Shadow Serene Square came in and out. There was also someone guarding it. It was a middle-aged man. Shan Pao went forward and whispered a few words to the middle-aged man. At first, the middle-aged man was a little unwilling. Then, Shan Pao gave him a bundle of coins and said a few more words. The middle-aged man beamed with joy and let them in. After entering the broken tower, Li Daocheng's eyes lit up. The inside was very different from the outside. The outside was a broken tower that could collapse at any time. The bottom of the tower was covered in cobwebs and dust. However, the inside was simply another world. The decorations were elegant and magnificent. The entire floor was divided into 2 halves, separated by a layer of light. Inside the light screen, there were many sparkling and translucent counters. Behind each counter, there was a beautiful woman receiving customers. At this moment, many customers were looking at the counters and choosing the items they wanted. Brotherly, only silver members can enter the light. We can only go to the shadow market on the first floor. Shan Pao saw Li Daocheng staring at the light and explained. Li Daocheng nodded and followed Shan Pao. They walked to a huge rune formation ladder and slowly went down to the first floor. At the bottom, Li Daocheng was once again impressed by everything in front of him. There was an underground space under the underground city. There was actually such a huge space under the broken tower. It was brightly lit. The vendors were selling their wares in an orderly manner. There were waves of people coming and going, shoulder to shoulder. It was very lively. There was so much human traffic that it could not be seen from the outside. Brotherly, this is the Shadow Serene Square's shadow market. There are entrances to the underground city in all directions. Shan Pao looked proud. How many stalls are there? Li Daocheng's eyes lit up. No more, no less, exactly 2,000. Shan Pao replied. It's full every day. Li Daocheng was very curious about where so many people came from to set up stalls. Yes, brotherly. In the entire Blue Bay Star, people who have good goods will choose to set up stalls here. The goods are sold quickly and can be sold for a good price. The government doesn't care? Brotherly, the higher level matters aren't small things like me, right? What? Liamo? Guanadine? Hao Qin secretly slept with Miao Moi. His legs were broken and his heart was broken. Pancreatitis? Pao Song, snatching she and I? Huan Fong is an element of Bao. Sulking. My feet are bowed low, my legs are bowed low, my legs are bowed low, my feet are bowed low, my feet are bowed low, my legs are bowed low, my feet are bowed lowly. Daocheng walked along the path separating the 2 stalls and headed towards the south of the film market. When they reached the south, Li Daocheng soon saw a stall with a banner saying, Ghost Apprentice for sale. Li Daocheng just happened to want ghost apostles. The soul power of skeleton dwarves and bound spirits was a bit too little for him at the 5th level of Qi refining. Absorbing a few dozen of them at once was not as good as absorbing them all at once. Boss, how much is the Ghost Apprentice? Li Daocheng stepped forward and asked. 30,000 for one. The stall owner was an old man with a dark complexion. His 2 turbid old eyes stared unblinkingly at the worn-out spirit brain in his hands. He didn't even look at Li Daocheng as he replied in a low voice, as if he didn't care about the business at all. What? 30,000 for one? Li Daocheng cried out in shock. He thought it might be expensive, but he didn't think it would be this expensive. If you think it's too expensive, then scram. I won't sell it for less than 30,000. The old man impatiently replied. Just as he finished speaking, his eyes widened and he suddenly jumped up from the stool. He stared at the spirit brain screen and beat his chest and stomped his feet as he yelled, "My ghost weeping net design, my ghost weeping net design, it's gone, it's all gone. Misty Company, F***CK your mother. With the Misty spirit brain, you'll have no worries from now on." Which bastard made up the advertisement? It's all a fucking lie. Li Daochong glanced at the old man's spirit brain. The screen was flickering, and repeated dialogue boxes kept appearing. Chapter 28. The old man anxiously walked around in circles as he stared at the spiritual brain. Li Daochong said enthusiastically, "Boss, there should be a problem with your spiritual brain's spiritual base system. It could also be that the internal chip isn't properly plugged in." The old man was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. "You know how to fix spiritual brains?" Li Daochong smiled. "A little." The old man immediately grabbed Li Daochong. "Young man, can you help me take a look and see what's wrong with my spiritual brain? Can I find the simulated magical equipment spirit sequence that I refined?" Li Daochong picked up the spiritual brain and looked at it. Then he placed his hand on the spiritual light screen and began to operate it. The spirit light screen was one of the greatest discoveries of the cultivation civilization. It allowed spiritual energy to be displayed in the form of light through a certain sequence. At the same time, it allowed the cultivator to directly use the touch screen to carry out the spiritual base programming. There was no need to hit different rune buttons on the glyph plate like before. When inputting spiritual energy of different intensity, one had to hit different rune buttons. Now, there was no need to go through so much trouble. Anyone with spiritual energy could directly touch the spiritual brain and program the spiritual base. Li Daochong relied on his solid foundation from his previous life to deduce many things from one example. In the past few days, he had also read many books about spiritual brains. His understanding of spiritual brains and spiritual base programming was growing at an astonishing speed. Li Daochong was very familiar with the process. He directly entered the system and took a look. The system seemed to be affected by some kind of interference, causing the screen to freeze. This problem was very easy to solve. Li Daochong focused his energy and used his spiritual energy and psychic energy to get rid of the interfering spiritual order in the spiritual brain. The so-called interfering spiritual order was actually a kind of spiritual order virus that spread through the spiritual network. With Li Daochong's current ability, a simple spiritual order virus wasn't difficult for him. The flickering spiritual light screen gradually calmed down and the image on the screen stabilized. Soon, it returned to normal. A three-dimensional black net pattern appeared on the screen. The old man, who had been nervously watching Li Daochong operate the spiritual brain, was already sweating profusely. Now that the spiritual brain had recovered, he danced with joy. "Ah, my design is back. Young man, thank you so much." This old man doesn't know what to say, huh? "Boss, it was nothing. You're welcome." Li Daochong returned the spiritual brain to the old man and said, "Boss, I want to buy 2 imprisoned ghost disciples. Can you give me a discount?" The old man smiled and said, "Young man, you've helped me a lot, so of course I have to give you a discount. If it was a normal ghost disciple, this old man wouldn't mind giving you one, but this time I caught 5 wolf ghost disciples that are almost at the level of green ghost. I spent more than 100 spirit stones and 3 ghost weeping nets to catch them alive. Although ghost disciples aren't powerful dark ghosts, it's not easy to catch them alive. The cost is too high, so I can't give them to you. However, you really helped me a lot this time. This old man has designed a new ghost weeping net, and it's 3 times stronger than the old one. If it wasn't for the fact that you lost all of your spiritual order, it would have taken me several years to make another one." The old man clenched his teeth and said, "Young man, I'll give you half price. 15,000 each. I'll sell it to you at cost price." Li Daochong felt a bit embarrassed. He had just heard someone hawking a ghost child, a low-level ghost disciple, for 18,000 each. The wolf ghost disciple was 30,000 each. The old man didn't ask for a random price and was very fair. Now that he was offering a 50% discount, It was definitely a good price. Li Daochong didn't dawdle and smiled. All right, I'll take all 5. The old man didn't hesitate. All right, 75,000 each. However, just as he finished speaking, a trace of worry flashed through the old man's eyes. He looked at the young man in front of him and said in a low voice, "Young man, why are you buying so many wolf ghost disciples? Looking at your young age, are you going to refine them for cultivation? If you haven't reached the chi gathering stage, it won't be easy to refine them. Be careful of the backlash. Don't blame this old man for not warning you." Hearing the old man's words, Li Daochong became vigilant and immediately refused. "Of course not." The old man nodded and said, "Young man, the dark ghost trade is prohibited by the government, but in order to increase the enthusiasm of the people to catch dark ghosts, the government is turning a blind eye to the trade of low-level dark ghosts. However, on the surface, no one dares to trade dark ghosts. Although dark ghosts are allowed to trade dark ghosts underground, apart from the lowest level dwarf ghost, any dark ghost above that level must be imprisoned by a talisman array and have their soul erased. These are the rules of the trade. Dark ghosts are extremely dangerous and terrifying creatures. They can only be used for cultivation and research and have no other use. Once the imprisonment is removed, no matter what method is used, the imprisoned dark ghost soul will scatter and disappear into nothingness. You should be clear about this." The old man's words were rather subtle, but Li Daochong could still understand the old man's intentions. He probably did not want Li Daochong to try to use these dark ghosts to do bad things. First, he was telling him that it was not allowed by the law. Secondly, he was telling him that even if he wanted to, he could not do it because the wolf ghost apostles were imprisoned. This old man was not someone who only cared about profits. Li Daochong looked at him in a new light. He had thought that the people of the underground city were people who only cared about money and not people who were blinded by greed and had no bottom line. Li Daochong nodded and said, "Thank you for the reminder. I know all this. Boss, don't worry. I have my own uses for the wolf ghost apostles. I definitely won't use them to harm people." "That's good. The things are here. Pay the bill." The old man handed a small bag to Li Daochong and said, "This small storage bag has 2 square meters of space. There's no extra charge." After paying, Li Daochong could not help but feel a bit of heartache. 75,000 was gone, just like that. He did not know if 5 wolf ghost apostles would be enough for him to level up again. After deducting 75,000 from 250,000, Li Daochong still had 175,000 in his Spirit King purse. After the transfer was completed, the old man asked for Li Daochong's 1,000-mile messenger ID. The two of them became friends, and the old man said that he had a friend who had a spirit brain that had been infected with a virus. He had found many spirit sequence technicians, but had not been able to cure it. The spirit brain had very important information on refining magic treasures. When he had time, he wanted Li Daochong to take a look. It was fine if he could not fix it. If he could fix it, he would definitely reward him handsomely. Li Daochong felt that it was worth a try, so he added the old man. The old man's ID was very simple, Old Ghost Zhang. After that, Li Daochong walked around the movie market. The old man's words reminded Li Daochong that he was worried that buying a large amount of low-grade dark ghosts would attract attention, so he decided not to buy anymore. Instead, he bought some other things. There were a few second-hand spirit brains. These spirit brains were very cheap. They were all obsolete spirit brains, but they were all flagship models from back in the day. There was a low-grade human-grade Zamadeo. Li Daochong hesitated for a long time before buying it. He did not have a weapon of his own yet, so he could fly on his sword after reaching the 7th stage of chi refinement. Cultivators were all almighty beings who could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. Who would drive a floating car? That was a transportation tool for people who had not become cultivators. This Amadeo was 1 meter long. The narrowest part was 3 fingers wide, and the widest part was as wide as a palm. The back of the blade was straight up and down, and it was completely black. The handle was 1/2 meter long and could be held with 1 hand or with 2. The entire blade was made of plate silver. Plate silver was the lowest grade of spirit medium metal. Simply put, It was the lowest grade of metal that could be used to make magic treasures. Low-grade human grade was also the lowest grade of magic treasures. Even so, this Amadeo cost Li Daochong a total of 40,000 Federation coins. Li Daochong bought a total of 10,000 Federal coins for the Spirit computers. He also bought some parts for the Spirit Drive. His Spirit Drive pickup truck was on the verge of being scrapped. Whenever he started, it would make a buzzing sound, as if it would break down at any moment. Li Daochong also bought a set of Dharma robes for Yinping. However, the robes were damaged and needed to be repaired when they returned. Otherwise, its usefulness would be greatly reduced. Even though it was damaged, this high-grade human-grade Dharma robe still cost 20,000 Federation coins. After a round of shopping, Li Daochong spent 100,000 Federation coins like water. He only had 75,000 Federation coins left. The tuition fee of Xiansong University was 50,000 Federation coins. Li Daochong also wanted to buy a house in the slums, which would cost about 10,000 to 20,000 Federation coins. The remaining money could not be spent anymore. Before coming to the movie market, Li Daochong thought that 250,000 Federation coins was a huge sum of money. However, after coming here, he realized that 250,000 Federation coins was nothing in the world of cultivators. A real cultivator would spend a lot of money for a magic treasure. Spending millions or even tens of millions of Federation coins was nothing. After returning from a rewarding journey, Li Daochong returned to the meeting place with Shan Pao. The latter was already waiting there. The two left the movie market and went back the way they came. After walking out of the broken tower, Li Daochong and Shan Pao parted ways. The latter told Li Daochong that because he spent 100,000 Federation coins on his first visit to the movie market, he automatically became a junior member. In the future, he could freely enter and leave the movie market. However, he still could not enter the U Tower and needed to become a silver member. Li Daochong could not wait to return to the parked floating pickup. He wanted to find a deserted place to absorb the bag of soul crystals and the 5 ghost wolves to see if he could break through to the 6th stage of chi refining. Li Daochong had just entered the parking lot when he saw a few burly men in the corner dragging a young girl into an alley. Wasn't that Li Qingyao? Li Daochong's pupils shrank. Li Qingyao was his sister, but they were not related by blood. Li Tianyang had picked her up in the 9-ring star zone more than 10 years ago during a mission. The two grew up together and were naturally very familiar with each other. Li Daochong was sure that he was not mistaken. Why was she here? Li Daochong was puzzled. This girl did not have a good relationship with him since they were young. She would often bully him together with the other members of the Li family. After Li Tianyang's accident, Li Qingyao claimed that Li Tianyang beat and scolded her every day in order to clear her name. She even accused Li Daochong of molesting her. In order to protect herself, she abandoned her father and humiliated her brother to the point of insanity. Li Daochong did not have the slightest bit of affection for his sister, Li Qingyao. In fact, he hated her. Li Daochong heard from Yinping that Li Qingyao had been eating, drinking, and playing with a bunch of rich kids in Tianyuan City for the past few years. Zhan Honglai was one of them. Li Daochong saw very clearly just now. Those burly men were forcefully dragging Li Qingyao away. It seemed that there was a conflict between them. Li Daochong curled his lips. He put the things in his hands into the car and prepared to leave. He did not intend to ask about Li Qingyao's affairs. "I've given you the money. Where's my father?" Just as Li Daochong was about to get into the car, Li Qingyao's voice clearly entered his ears. Due to the psychokinesis battle technique, Li Daochong's senses will become sharper every time he broke through. The same went for his hearing. Chapter 29. Where the hell is my father? Li Daochong was shocked when he heard this. Who else could the father that Li Qingyao spoke of be other than Li Tianyang? There couldn't be a second person. Li Qingyao was an orphan that Li Tianyang had picked up from the front lines 15 years ago. Her biological parents had died long ago in the Dark Lands where the Nether Ghosts had wreaked havoc. Apart from Li Tianyang, Li Qingyao couldn't have had any other father. Li Daochong couldn't understand this seemingly random sentence. Even if he didn't want to have anything to do with Li Qingyao, he couldn't help but be curious. Li Daochong silently walked to the dark alley. There wasn't a single place in the underground city that was dry. Everywhere there was a warm stench, like the smell of rotting food in the sewers. This floating car park seemed to be an undeveloped piece of land. It was messy and uncared for. There were all kinds of floating cars parked here, big and small. Rather than calling it a car park, it was better to call it a floating car graveyard. Some of the cars were covered in dust and had long since become zombie cars. Some of the strange-looking cars had been disassembled. There were almost no people here. Occasionally, there would be 2 or 3 wanderers in tattered clothes gathered together to consume inferior immortal grass. Immortal grass was actually heroin that was born in the cultivation civilization. After consuming it, it would cause hallucinations and intense pleasure that would pierce the depths of one's soul. Even cultivators couldn't avoid it. The natural cover around the car park was perfect for Li Daochong to hide. He could see everything that was happening in the alley through the gaps. The girl was undoubtedly Li Qingyao. She was surrounded by 3 big men. The 3 of them had a blood-red blade tattoo on their exposed arms. All of them looked fierce and fiendish. Money? What money? A burly bald man with a rough face sneered. What do you mean? Li Qingyao asked. Miss Li, I'm the one asking you what you mean. Do you want money? Sure, if you make us feel good, we'll naturally give you money. Another short, strong man said as he reached out to grab Li Qingyao's arm. Let go of me. Didn't you say that you know where Li Tianyang is? As long as I pay you 50,000 Federation coins, you can reveal first-hand information to me. Are you trying to go back on your word? Li Qingyao saw that the situation was not right. She retreated as she spoke, looking for an opportunity to escape. However, the 3 men surrounded each other and completely blocked the way in front of her. Li Qingyao had no one behind her, but behind her was a dead end. Yeah, we have news about Li Tianyang. Where is he? I'll tell you if you pay me. Didn't I just give you 50,000? When did you give it to us? Miss Li, it seems that you don't have enough sleep. You must have remembered wrongly. Haha. Give me back my money, Li Qingyao said as she backed away, knowing that something was wrong. Didn't I tell you? If you want money, follow us to a place. I guarantee you'll feel good and get money. Baldy pressed on. Help! Li Qingyao knew that she had been tricked and screamed for help. Miss Li, it's useless even if you scream until your throat is hoarse. This is the underground city, not Tianyuan City. It seems that you still don't understand the situation. The short, strong man rubbed his hands with a perverted expression and reached out to grab Li Qingyao again. Li Qingyao tried to dodge, but was caught by Baldy, who was approaching from the other side. Let go of me. Do you know who I am? Li Qingyao couldn't break free. She used her trump card and was about to announce her identity, but she was interrupted before she could finish. Who are you? Aren't you just Li Tianyang's adopted daughter? Are you that awesome? That cheap father of yours is a street rat now. Who do you think you are? Do you think you're still in the past? The short, strong man said with disdain. Li Qingyao's eyes widened. You know who I am, and you still dare to touch me? Aren't you afraid that the Li family will destroy your nest? Baldy looked at Li Qingyao sympathetically. It's precisely because we know who you are that we did it. We brothers have never tasted a beauty from a big family like you before. Today is the perfect time to do so. Haha. Li Qingyao was completely dumbfounded. No matter how slow she was, she knew that she had been tricked. After Li Tianyang's incident, Li Qingyao immediately spread the news that Li Daochong had molested her. Li Tianyang beat and scolded her every day, try her best to distance herself from him so that the outside world would know that she was irreconcilable with the father and son. The reason why Li Qingyao did this was because Li Tianyang had sent her an encrypted message before the incident, asking her to do so. Li Tianyang's crime of defection was set up by someone. In order to save his life, he had no choice but to flee at the last moment. Otherwise, he would have been killed by his own people. Li Qingyao's bullying of Li Daochong since they were young was also ordered by Li Tianyang. The goal was to provoke Li Daochong and make him work harder. However, this kid was born with a congenital defect. No matter how Li Qingyao bullied Li Daochong, It was like throwing meat buns at a dog. This guy did not respond at all. In fact, Li Qingyao had always felt guilty towards Li Daocheng, but there was nothing she could do. After Li Tianyang's incident, Li Qingyao used everything she could to secretly protect Li Daocheng's life. Back then, the Li family wanted to kill Li Daocheng to prove their family's innocence to the military. Li Qingyao gave all her savings to the Li family's first elder, Li Boyo's grandson, Li Jinghua. This kid used the family's money to invest in stocks. In the end, he lost so much money that not even dregs were left. Li Qingyao thought that she had something on Li Jinghua and gave him money to make him listen to her. The Li family's oldest direct descendant, Li Daocheng's life was indeed under Li Qingyao's control at first. It was because he persuaded his grandfather, Li Boyo, not to kill Li Daocheng and came up with a plan to get the Qiao family to return the betrothal gifts that they were able to save Li Daocheng's life. Otherwise, Li Daocheng would have been executed by the Li family behind closed doors and his body would have been handed over to the Federation's cultivation army. However, after this incident, Li Qingyao tried to order Li Jinghua around again, but the latter would always find all kinds of excuses to stop her. He would either drag it out or say that it wasn't easy to do and that he needed time. Thinking about it carefully, Li Qingyao seemed to have thought of something from the words of these three villainous men. "You're not from the Dark Knight? Who asked you to pretend to be from the Dark Knight to trick me into coming here?" Li Qingyao asked with a pale face. "It doesn't matter who it was. The important thing is that you're here. Miss Li, we've already wasted too much time. As the saying goes, every minute of the night is worth 1,000 gold. We've wasted more than 45 minutes. TSK, what a waste." The bald man shook his head. Then a lustful light flashed in his eyes. "Tear her clothes. Remember to record the whole process. That young master needs to see it, or he won't give us the rest of the money. Go." The bald man hugged Li Qingyao tightly. The short and strong young man went up and tore off Li Qingyao's clothes. The other big man turned on the spirit camera on his wristwatch and began to record the scene. Li Qingyao's intestines turned green with regret. She was still too naive. She didn't do things meticulously enough and thought too simply. More importantly, she didn't have the strength. If she had listened to her father and focused on cultivation instead of learning to be a refiner, perhaps she would have the strength to protect herself now. It wasn't that refiners weren't strong, but refiners were the same as alchemists. The learning cycle was longer and more difficult than pure cultivation. The first 3 years of university required one to study the complicated basic knowledge. Naturally, cultivation would be delayed. These two professions required a lot of accumulation. The further one progressed, the stronger they would be. However, the early stages were still a noob. Li Qingyao was only at the 3rd level of qi refinement. Moreover, she hadn't learned any combat skills, let alone cultivation methods. The cultivation of these 3 big men wasn't high. At most, they were about the same level as Li Qingyao. However, in terms of strength, they crushed Li Qingyao. To put it bluntly, it was the difference between ordinary people, between a strong man and a weak woman. One of them could eat you to death, let alone 3 of them. Li Qingyao had no strength to resist at all. She could only watch as the short and strong young man tore off her clothes. "No!" Li Qingyao let out a heart-wrenching cry of despair. Tears fell helplessly from her frightened and pretty face. "Ha ha! This is so satisfying." Louder. When a woman says no, it's the most enjoyable moment. "Shorty, hurry up. I can't wait to see the difference between a lady's body and an ordinary woman's body." The bald man laughed excitedly. The short and strong young man's bestial instincts were completely aroused. He reached out with both hands and was about to tear the last piece of thin underwear on Li Qingyao's upper body, just as Li Qingyao was about to fall into the abyss. The short and strong young man was suddenly stunned. He stopped and looked a little dazed. Seeing this, the bald man scolded, "Shorty, what are you looking at? Hurry up and do it. If you want to die, then move." Chapter 30. Li Daocheng, who had been hiding in the dark and watching the whole thing, hesitated for a while before finally making a move. The conversation between Li Qingyao and the three thugs was a little confusing to Li Daocheng. However, it seemed that Li Qingyao knew something that no one else knew. Although Li Daocheng didn't have a good impression of Li Qingyao, they were still family. Even if he had a grudge with this sister who didn't like him, he could only teach her a lesson himself. Seeing Li Qingyao being bullied and humiliated, Li Daocheng couldn't stand it no matter what. Li Daocheng's telekinesis attack was meant to turn the short, strong youth into an idiot. However, the distance of 50 meters was too far, and the short, strong youth's mental strength exceeded Li Daocheng's expectations. Unfortunately, it only paralyzed the target for a moment. Li Daocheng saw that the attack didn't achieve the desired effect, so he had to stop them. However, Li Daocheng didn't plan to show himself. He didn't trust Li Qingyao, so he deliberately changed his voice when he spoke. It was hoarse and deep, not like the voice of a young man at all. "Who's there?" The bald man looked around but didn't find anything. "Someone you can't afford to offend." Li Daocheng used his telekinesis to spread his voice. With the three thugs level, they couldn't tell where the voice came from. "Friend, we're all here to make a living. Don't you know the rules of the underground city? Our Blood Knife Society has always minded our own business. But if anyone dares to provoke us, the Blood Knife Society won't be afraid of him." The bald man couldn't find the direction of the voice, but he knew that the other party was strong. He was afraid and introduced himself, hoping to intimidate the other party with the name of the Blood Knife Society. "I'll give you 3 seconds to get lost, or I'll kill you." Li Daocheng's low and hoarse voice left no room for doubt. "Friend, it seems that you're determined to go against our Blood Knife Society." The bald man's face was ferocious. 1. The short and strong youth's sluggish expression gradually recovered. He looked around in horror, and his hair stood on end. He felt like he was dead and didn't know anything for a few seconds. It was as if he had disappeared from this world at that moment. "Shorty, what are you waiting for? Quickly release the signal rune card to call for reinforcements." The bald man gave the short and strong youth a look and lowered his voice to the lowest possible volume. Unfortunately, even in such a low voice, Li Daocheng still heard it clearly. The stocky young man then reached into his pocket. Suddenly, the short and stout youth let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed to the ground. His body twitched incessantly as he held his head with both hands in extreme pain. Looking at the short, stout youth, the bald man's face was filled with horror. He had heard that there were a very small number of mental cultivators among the self-cultivators who possessed the ability to kill people and formless super-strong mental attacks. Without the chi-gathering stage, it was impossible for the strength of one's spiritual force to reach the level of telekinesis attacks. Baldy's body trembled. Chi-gathering stage cultivators were the highest level of existence in the Blood Knife Society. They weren't weak at all. "Guangweya!" The other big man screamed and fell to the ground. Fear made Baldy unconsciously loosen his grip on Li Qingyao. At this moment, Li Qingyao was also in a daze. She was also looking for the source of the sound, but the sound seemed to have passed through the void and wasn't here at all. Baldy turned around and ran. Just as he ran 2 steps, he let out a blood-curdling scream and fell to the ground. He held his head and rolled around. The 3 big men stopped moving after a while. They had all fainted, leaving Li Qingyao standing there in a daze. At the same time, Li Daocheng was slumped on the ground behind a scrapped floating car in the distance. If he wanted to effectively attack the 3 of them from such a distance, he had no choice but to go all out, even exceeding his limit. The 3 big men's spiritual force was also stronger than the average person. It was probably the complex and harsh living environment of the underground city that had trained their willpower. Li Daocheng released the 3 telekinesis attacks, and his entire body collapsed. Fortunately, his telekinesis had increased after leveling up. Otherwise, he would have had to show himself. "Senior, thank you for saving my life. Can you show yourself?" Li Qingyao recovered and said gratefully, "There's no need for that. Tell me where Captain Li is right now. Li Daochong forced himself to be alert and asked, Captain Li? Senior, you are? Li Qingyao was stunned. I'm your father's former subordinate. I don't believe that Captain Li is a traitor. I've been investigating this matter for a while, but there hasn't been any progress. Captain Li was framed, right? Li Daochong asked. Li Qingyao pursed her lips. Although the other party had saved her, he wasn't willing to see her with his real face. She couldn't help but be wary. Naturally, she wouldn't answer such a sensitive question. Li Qingyao had already been tricked once. This time, she had learned her lesson. Senior, I don't know anything. Li Qingyao made up her mind. Regardless of whether the other party was telling the truth or not, she wouldn't reveal any information about her father. Upon hearing Li Qingyao's words, Li Daochong frowned slightly. This lass had become vigilant now. What a headache. Thus, he spoke again. You don't know anything? Girl, I heard everything you said with those 3 guys. Didn't you pay them for information about your father's whereabouts? You were only tricked. Don't worry, I'm your father's former subordinate. If you tell me what you know, I'll definitely help Captain Li clear his name. Senior, I really don't know anything. Li Qingyao was unmoved. Li Daochong was about to go crazy. However, he couldn't expose himself in front of Li Qingyao. The people Li Qingyao interacted with were more complicated. She was a group of hedonistic sons from the 4 great clans. She was also from the 2nd and 3rd generations of other powerful clans in Tianyuan City. Li Daochong remembered that Li Qingyao had once attended Zhang Honglia's birthday party. Girl, 15 years ago, Captain Li led 3 of his trusted subordinates on a mission to Spinning Top Planet, which had been completely invaded by the Hades. When he passed by Quicksand City, he saw a 4-year-old girl being hung on a tree for exorcism. She was about to be burned to death. Captain Li risked exposing his identity and saved the girl. In the end, his identity was exposed, and he was discovered by 3 malicious ghosts. Li Qingyao's beautiful eyes were slightly open. Her eyes were hazy as she held back her tears. Apart from Li Tianyang, no one else knew about this past. This was because the 3 trusted subordinates of Li Tianyang had all died on that mission. Li Tianyang risked his life to save her from the Hades. Dad, you had such an important mission at that time. Why did you save me? Weren't you afraid that you wouldn't be able to complete the mission? Li Qingyao asked Li Tianyang when she grew up. I saved as many as I could. If I couldn't even save a child, what was the point of cultivating? What was the point of being a cultivator? Li Tianyang played it down. Memories flashed through her mind. Li Qingyao's lips trembled. Senior, she choked on her words. Li Daochong sighed in his heart. Girl, I'll ask you 3 questions. If you're willing to answer, then answer. If you're not willing to answer, then pretend I didn't ask. First question, was Captain Li framed? Yes. Where is Captain Li? I'm also looking for my father. Why did you frame Captain Li and his son? My father asked me to do this. Before the accident, he sent me an encrypted message from 1,000 miles away. He asked me to deliver this message to an old man named Pang Dehai at Tianyao Firm, number 18, Milk Lane, Southgate Street. I'll ask one more question. Did you deliver it? Yes. It's not safe here. Girl, hurry up and find a place to hide. The hoarse voice reminded her, and then went silent. Li Qingyao stood there for a while, but there was no sound. She looked around, but there was no one around. It was as if she was just talking to the air. After Li Daochong finished his questions, he immediately hid himself. He only returned to his car when he saw Li Qingyao safely driving her spiritual float away and leaving the underground city. When he returned home, Li Daochong was starving. As usual, Silver Bottle prepared a sumptuous dinner. Li Daochong, who was about to faint from hunger, gorged himself on the food. 2 plates of sea beast meat were devoured until not even the bones were left. Li Daochong returned to his bedroom in satisfaction. Li Daochong spent an hour to absorb the entire bag of soul crystals. The spiritual energy in his body increased by a lot. However, there were no signs of leveling up. The spiritual energy required for the 5th level of qi refining was beyond imagination. Li Daochong's left shoulder joint ached from time to time, causing his heart to be unable to calm down completely. Zhang Honglia's sneak attack this time was vicious and vicious. However, with every increase in spiritual energy in Li Daocheng's body, the pain in his shoulder would lessen by a bit. Following that, Li Daocheng absorbed the 5 imprisoned wolf ghoul apostles. The 5 wolf ghoul apostles were the most powerful dark ghosts Li Daocheng had absorbed so far. These wolf-shaped dark ghosts were much stronger than the dark ghosts Li Daocheng had encountered before. One had to be at least at the 6th level of qi refining to deal with them. If he hadn't spent money to buy them, Li Daocheng wouldn't have been able to capture or kill them with his current strength. After Li Daocheng absorbed the 3rd wolf ghoul apostle, the hot-blooded upgrader finally sent out a notification. Soul power obtained. Host has leveled up to level 6. Li Daocheng had never felt so full. The spiritual energy in his body surged and expanded violently. The 3rd basic spiritual meridian was completely activated and became large and elastic. After absorbing the last 2 wolf ghoul apostles, Li Daocheng didn't level up anymore. Obviously, the amount of spiritual energy he needed would increase exponentially in the future. However, the 4th basic spiritual meridian was also activated. From its withered state, it swelled and thickened, pulsing with a strong heartbeat. The spiritual meridian was like the heart, and the spiritual energy was like the blood. It circulated repeatedly, contracting and releasing, feeding back to the body and automatically tempering the body. Those without spiritual meridians had no possibility of cultivating. The opening of all 5 spiritual meridians was the minimum requirement to be able to gather spiritual energy in the end. If all 9 meridians were opened, the spiritual root would appear, and one could reach foundation establishment. With the opening of all 4 spiritual meridians, Li Daocheng's brain quietly changed. His mental power actually more than doubled. Li Daocheng couldn't wait to enter the spiritual nexus. He randomly entered a testing platform and came in front of a punching machine. Bang! He punched out 2,345 kilograms. Chapter 31. When he woke up naturally, Li Daocheng felt indescribably comfortable from head to toe. He was in high spirits, full of energy, and full of energy. He felt like he had to get it all out. Li Daocheng had been too sleepy last night, so he hadn't sorted out the items he had bought. He had put them all in the small dimensional bag the old man had given him. Li Daocheng only found out after becoming friends with the old man that the old man's surname was Zhao, and that he was a refiner. His side job was to catch ghosts and earn some extra money. The dimensional bag the old man had given him was worth at least 10,000 Federation coins on the market. It had 2 cubic meters of fragment space inside. With this thing, he didn't have to worry about having too many things. As long as it wasn't anything big, 2 cubic meters of space was enough to store a lot of things. There was a Zamadeo, a few old spiritual brains, a dozen or so parts of the floating car, and finally, a Taoist robe. Li Daocheng took out the spiritual brains and placed them on the desk in his bedroom. He would study them later in the afternoon. He gave Yinping the Taoist robe and gave her 3,000 Federation coins. She was to go to Butcher Lu's house after breakfast and ask him to repair the Taoist robe. Li Daocheng had heard that Butcher Lu used to be a refiner. His rank wasn't very high, but he was injured in an accident while refining. His spirit root was damaged, and he could no longer cultivate. Thus, he left the cultivation world. Butcher Lu's injuries were very serious. He had spent all his savings to save his life. After that, he brought his wife to Blue Bay Star. He bought a house in the western district of Tianyuan City and lived there in seclusion. The Taoist robe's rank wasn't high. It was only a low-grade human rank artifact. Li Daocheng had bought it for Yinping mainly because of the gang hammer incident, which had left him with lingering fear. With the Taoist robe, it would be difficult for cultivators below the 4th level of qi refining to hurt Yinping. Even if the floating car crashed into her at full speed, the Taoist robe would be able to withstand it. Li Daocheng didn't expect Butcher Lu to be able to repair the Taoist robe. It would be enough if it could recover half or even a third of its original defensive power. Young master, Yinping already is close to where? You don't have to spend money to buy new clothes. Silver Bottle felt that it wasn't worth it. Looking at the gorgeous clothes with a few holes, he thought that the clothes didn't look warm at all. With so many holes, the price shouldn't be low. He might as well buy a few dozen pounds of meat to eat. Since you've already bought it, remember to get it fixed at Butcher Lou's place. Wear it when it's fixed. I'll check it when I come back. If you don't wear it, I'll be angry. Li Daocheng knew it was useless to explain to Yin Ping, so he could only say it in a commanding tone. Understood, young master. As long as Silver Bottle heard Li Daocheng's commanding tone, she immediately stopped talking nonsense and obeyed. The world of the card slaves was not something ordinary people could understand. In short, they were the best slaves in the Shenhua Federation. Li Daocheng gobbled up the breakfast prepared by Yin Ping and went to school. Standing in front of the weightlessness room number 5 on the 3rd floor of the training center, Li Daocheng hesitated. The girl from yesterday came and went without a trace. She was so mysterious and unreal. Li Daocheng spent most of his money yesterday, and he didn't dare to spend a rest. He had some scruples about the girl reporting his threats. If the girl really gave the video to the director of the training center, the school would definitely ask him to compensate for the broken tester. That thing was expensive. Li Daocheng couldn't afford it, even if he sold himself. Whatever, since I'm already here, I'll go in and take a look. If there's no one, it's none of my business, Li Daocheng thought as he pushed open the door of the weightlessness room number 5. As soon as the door opened, there seemed to be a suction force that sucked Li Daocheng in, and the door closed automatically. Li Daocheng stood in front of the door and looked around suspiciously. It was actually much bigger than it looked from the outside. It was at least a few hundred square meters in area. The inside was a semicircular space. A girl floated in the middle with her eyes closed. She floated up and down from time to time. Li Daocheng looked at this scene in surprise. Before he could say anything, he floated up as well. His body seemed to have lost its weight. However, after floating for a few seconds, his body sank and fell again. As soon as he landed, the direction of gravity changed instantly. Li Daocheng felt a suction force on his left side, and his body quickly slammed into the wall on the left without any support. Just as Li Daocheng was about to hit the wall on the left, the direction of gravity changed again with a whoosh. The suction force on the right side suddenly increased. Dozens of seconds later, Li Daocheng was like a duckweed in the sea, swaying up and down left and right. Senior, you asked me to come here just to play with this? Li Daocheng saw that the girl kept her eyes closed and didn't greet him, so he couldn't help but ask. The girl was also like him. The direction of gravity was constantly changing, but her body's center of gravity was very stable. She wasn't like Li Daocheng, who was constantly bending his waist, then bending his body back, then bending his body sideways. His hands were constantly swaying, and so were his legs. You think it's fun? Chu Qianyue finally opened her mouth, but there was a trace of displeasure in her tone. The space gravity perception training she was most proud of was actually called fun, which was a blasphemy to her self-created training method. Isn't it fun? Li Daocheng asked back. Wasn't this the weightless experience hall in the amusement park on Earth? What was it if not fun? Chu Qianyue slowly opened her eyes and coldly stared at Li Daocheng. She reached out and patted him. Clap, clap. Li Daocheng didn't know what was going on. Suddenly, his body sank, and gravity came from above. Thump! With a muffled sound, Li Daocheng fell heavily on the roof. Unprepared, Li Daocheng grimaced in pain. Senior, you can't do this. Chu Qianyue was expressionless and snapped her fingers. The direction of gravity changed instantly. Bang! Li Daocheng fell directly to the south wall in free fall and almost fainted. Fortunately, he broke through to the 6th level of the Lianxi realm yesterday and opened 4.5 basic spiritual meridians. Otherwise, Li Daocheng would have broken his bones. Li Daocheng felt like he was a die in a dice barrel, being wantonly tossed around, bumping into dizziness. Is it fun? Chu Qianyue asked with a trace of provocation. Li Daocheng was so angry that he gritted his teeth. This woman was deliberately playing with him. He refused to give in and said, "It's fun." Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, Li Daochong fell from the roof and fell to the ground. After several times, Li Daochong was so angry that he was about to curse. Suddenly, he was stunned and looked at Chu Qianyue in a daze. That woman was in the same environment as him and also suffered from the change of gravity. But why didn't she fall even once? A big question mark appeared in Li Daochong's mind. When the gravity changed again, Li Daochong activated his spiritual aura to protect his body and stared at Chu Qianyue. When he fell, the girl also moved with the direction of gravity, but she had perfect control of her body. The change of gravity did not affect the girl's posture at all. When Li Daochong was free falling, she was calm. Her delicate body did not distort at all, and she easily adjusted her center of gravity. Finally, her feet fell in the direction of gravity. As long as one had the cultivation of the third or fourth level of the Lianqi realm and cultivated his body a little, a height of 10 or 20 meters was nothing. Li Daochong copied her and tried to adjust his center of gravity as soon as possible. However, the sudden change of gravity caused an extreme distortion of the drop in space, which would make people fall into an illusion for a while when they could not distinguish up from down and left from right. It was almost impossible for people to control their center of gravity and adjust their body state. After falling more than 10 times, Li Daochong's face was bruised and swollen. The qi and blood in his chest were surging. If he fell again, he would suffer internal injuries. Is it fun? Chu Qianyue asked calmly again. Chapter 32. Chu Qianyue saw that Li Daochong was still unwilling to give in, and her pair of beautiful eyes revealed deep doubts. Was this young man in front of her the same person as the person described in the information she had checked? After meeting Li Daochong yesterday, Chu Qianyue took advantage of her position to obtain Li Daochong's personal information in the school's archives room. After reading Li Daochong's file, Chu Qianyue had a great shock. She originally thought that this young man, with extremely strong spatial perception, must be gifted. Even if he was not a genius, at least he had the potential to have a special ability. But the description of Li Daochong in the file was poles apart from Chu Qianyue's imagination. Not only was he a waste with exhausted spiritual veins, but his brain was also not very bright. The appraisal result was that he was stupid, slightly mentally retarded, 5th level mentally disabled. Moreover, this guy's father had recently betrayed the country, and the entire Federation was looking for him. After reading Li Daochong's personal file, Chu Qianyue's interest in using Li Daochong to improve her spatial perception was greatly reduced. That day when this young man broke the void barrier with a punch, it must have been a blind cat catching a dead mouse. It was pure luck, and he did not have a spatial spiritual veins. A person with exhausted spiritual veins could not even sense spiritual energy, let alone space perception. In any case, this kind of disability absolutely could not rely on strength to break the void barrier. After reading the information, in addition to disappointment, Chu Qianyue was more irritated. If her spatial perception could not be improved, she would not be able to frequently travel to the border of the Hades to hunt dark ghosts in the future. If she wanted to safely travel once, the price would be greatly increased. Even if Chu Qianyue's family was rich, she could not afford it. For every 1% increase in the transmission array's round-trip accuracy, the price of the materials consumed would double. The more irritated Chu Qianyue was, the more she was in the mood to cultivate. When Li Daochong arrived as promised, she only had one thought. She wanted to teach this idiot a good lesson for making her happy for nothing. Chu Qianyue thought that after this fool was thrown twice, he would cry out and beg for mercy. Who would have thought that after being thrown dozens of times, each time heavier than the last, this young man did not have the slightest intention of begging for mercy? He was even more stubborn than a bull. His character was terrifyingly tenacious. Chu Qianyue's eyes flashed with astonishment. When she created this training method, she herself could only hold on for more than 50 times before she couldn't hold on anymore. There were broken bones all over her body. One of her broken ribs directly pierced in her lung lobe. Fun, satisfying, exhilarating. Every time Li Daochong fell, he would let out a loud scream. The 81st time, Chu Qianyue silently counted the number of times Li Daochong was thrown to the ground. She held the control panel of the weightless training room, and her joints were slightly pale. She, who had always been emotionless, was actually a little annoyed. How could there be someone in this world with a higher tolerance than her? The coldness in Chu Qianyue's eyes dropped a few degrees. She clenched her teeth and increased the frequency of gravity. Crack! Li Daochong crashed heavily into the left wall again, and the sound of bones breaking could be heard from his body. Chu Qianyue thought that Li Daochong would definitely let out a blood-curdling scream this time. However, Li Daochong actually laughed like a madman. Haha, so cool. Chu Qianyue only wanted to teach Li Daochong a lesson. She didn't really want to smash this young man, who had nothing to do with her, into a meat patty. But this young man never bowed his head. He shouted again and again, which thoroughly stimulated Chu Qianyue's desire to win. How could a building foundation stage cultivator, a specially invited lecturer of Xiansong University, lose to an immature fool whose spiritual vein had dried up? A black light flashed in Chu Qianyue's eyes. This young man had unexpectedly stimulated the trace of demonic nature hidden in her body for decades. Even the high-spirited battle sword Augustine from 7 years ago, who had now become a household name in Blue Bay Star, had failed to do so. Chu Qianyue had a huge secret. Once this secret was leaked out, it would set off a storm in the human world. But for 70 years, she had hidden it very well, and no one knew her secret. She was born from the union of a nether demon and a human, and inherited most of the human characteristics. Chu Qianyue, whose demonic nature had been stimulated, looked at Li Daochong, who was smashing down again, in astonishment. Was this guy not afraid of death? Li Daochong naturally didn't know what Chu Qianyue was thinking, and he didn't even think about death. In his opinion, this woman was the same as all other women, a narrow-minded woman who would play with others until death over some trivial matters. You wanted to change my words? In your dreams. Li Daochong spat in his heart. Although he was ruthless, the injuries caused by the heavy smashes were real. His bones had been broken in several places, but fortunately, they weren't in the critical parts. Li Daochong concentrated his spiritual energy on the 3 broken bones on his body to protect them, while he concentrated his attention on the spatial position and the direction of gravity. Since Li Daochong found that the girl could be unaffected, he tried to change the center of gravity of his body again and again. Although Li Daochong failed every time, he didn't feel discouraged at all. Instead, he became more and more focused, even forgetting everything around him and concentrating on perceiving. The direction of gravity was constantly changing, and the space was constantly changing up, down, left, and right. If he only relied on his eyes to perceive the instantaneous changes, what he saw would always be wrong. He would also feel dizzy, and after a long time, he would feel nauseous. Therefore, the only way to make an accurate judgment in the instant when the direction of gravity changed, and at the same time to keep the body in a balanced state and adjust the center of gravity in time, was to rely on the perception of the changes with mind power. The adjustment of the body's center of gravity required the coordination of the body and mind power. Li Daochong figured it out after more than 30 heavy smashes. Just because he figured it out didn't mean that he could do it. Dozens of attempts had little effect. Li Daochong quickly mastered the skill in the perception of mind power, and the previous dizziness soon disappeared. However, Li Daochong still couldn't grasp the key points of controlling his body. Even if he had the basic cultivation method, it was useless. The mind power and the body had reached a unified coordination, and that kind of precise control required extremely high requirements. However, after the 90th heavy fall, Li Daochong adjusted his body to a state where his feet were facing down for the first time. Adjusting the center of gravity and coordinating the body must be done in the instant when the direction of gravity changed, or else he would fall flat on his face. What made Li Daochong depressed was that it would be great if he could fly. Flying on a sword was the symbol of a cultivator. Great cultivators like Yuanying could even soar in the sky without the help of any magic weapons. How carefree and unfettered would that be? Li Daochong had yearned for countless times that he could also do that one day. This was not something he could only imagine after arriving here. On Earth, Li Daochong also dreamed of flying. Unfortunately, he couldn't guess the sixth layer of qi refining. There was a wide gap between him and flying on a sword, let alone flying on air. He could only dream about it. When Li Daochong was able to adjust his body for the first time, Chu Qinyue's calm face unexpectedly showed a change of expression. So fast? How could it be? It took her a whole month to master the technique. She endured at least 1,000 heavy falls every day and broke 8 Taoist robes before she understood a little bit of the trick. This guy only fell more than 100 times, and he understood it. Moreover, he didn't wear any Taoist robes and just used his body to resist. He didn't even care if his bones were broken. Was he still human? Chu Qianyue didn't believe it. She changed the direction of gravity again. Boom! Li Daochong staggered and fell to the ground. But this time his body was facing the direction of gravity. His feet were facing down, but he didn't control his center of gravity well. He staggered a few steps and fell. Chu Qinyue's pretty eyes were full of shock. She was actually frightened by a fool. More than 10 times. Li Daochong, without exception, adjusted his body to react in the instant when the gravity changed. It was just that when he fell, his posture was a bit awkward. But it was no longer a heavy fall. He had already touched the mystery, but he wasn't skilled enough and precise enough. Chu Qinyue's small mouth was slightly open. Her eyes were full of disbelief. She looked at Li Daochong as if she was looking at a monster. When she was training Battle Sword Augustine, she already felt that it was hard to believe that there was such an abnormal guy among humans. But at that time, Gu Ao's training was far less difficult than this guy's. Was he a fool? No, it was impossible. Chu Qinyue's eyes emitted a blazing light. She knew that she had found the person she was looking for. Chu Qinyue didn't care whether the school file was true or false, whether it was a mistake or some other reason. She just wanted to find a sparring partner. A sparring partner who could help her improve her spatial perception. This sparring partner only needed to have a super strong spatial perception. As for who he was, what his identity was, or whether he was a fool, Chu Qianyue didn't care at all. After more than 30 times, Li Daochong could basically stand firm and wouldn't fall again. Haha, fun too fun. Come on, let's continue. Li Daochong, who could no longer fall, looked up to the sky and laughed, looking at the girl not far away with a contemptuous look. Chu Qinyue's forehead was blank. Sure enough, he was a fool. Now, the gravity change speed was only at the second gear. This weightless training room had been modified by Chu Qianyue. Now there were a total of 12 gears, and the gravity increase could be increased from 0 to 10 times. Looking at the complacent Li Daochong, Chu Qianyue's eyes revealed a hint of cunning coldness. She lowered 2 gears to the 4th gear and doubled the gravity increase. Bang, crack. There was a heavy impact and the sound of bones breaking. So fun. Li Daochong lay on the ground and murmured. Then everything went black and he didn't know anything. A trace of blood flowed out of his mouth and he passed out. When Li Daochong woke up, he was lying on a bed full of fragrance. It was soft and comfortable, fluffy and soft. This seemed to be a woman's room. It was clean and tidy. Several women's vestments were hanging on the hangers, and many women's articles were placed at the head of the bed. Li Daochong remembered that before he passed out, he felt that his body had fallen apart, and at least a dozen bones were broken. But now he didn't feel anything and was as good as new. Are you awake? A voice came from the door of the room. Li Daochong got up and saw the senior standing at the door, looking at him expressionlessly. Where is this? The dormitory on the top floor of the training hall. The dormitory on the top floor of the training hall? Isn't that the teacher's dormitory specially provided by the school? Li Daochong looked doubtful. Yes, Chu Qianyue replied without a trace of emotion. This place is not open to students. How did you get in? Li Daochong was surprised. Hello, my name is Chu Qianyue. You can call me Teacher Chu. Starting today, I will give you 2 months of special training, Chu Qianyue said seriously. Chapter 33. Li Daocheng never thought that the pretentious senior sister in front of him would actually be Chu Qianyue. As the youngest specially invited lecturer of Xiansong University, Chu Qianyue had too many halos. Not only that, she also had another identity, the mentor of the #1 genius of Blue Bay Star, Battle Sword Augustine. 7 years ago, the first of the 3 geniuses who represented Xiansong University in the joint examination of 100 schools was this legendary figure. Today, the STO family of Blue Bay Star, one of the 4 major families of Blue Bay Star, also became the #1 family because of Augustine. 20 years ago, the #1 family was the Li family because the Li family at that time had Li Tianyang. Chu Qianyue was not a native of Blue Bay Star. 10 years ago, she transferred to Blue Bay Star Xiansong University from a resource-depleted planet in the 5-ring star sector. It took her only 3 years to reach the foundation establishment stage, and she stayed at the university to become a lecturer. Li Daocheng had seen Chu Qianyue once during the final exam last semester. Because it was too far away, he couldn't see her clearly. At that time, Li Daocheng also didn't pay much attention to these things, so the impression in his memory was relatively vague. Moreover, Li Daocheng would never have thought that Chu Qianyue would dress up as a senior sister and appear. Chu Qianyue was very satisfied with Li Daocheng's expression, which meant that this kid should have no objection to the special training she proposed. The advantage of being an excellent lecturer was that you could teach any student you wanted. However, Chu Qianyue's special training of Li Daocheng was entirely to find a sparring partner for herself, not for Li Daocheng. Just now, when Li Daocheng was unconscious, Chu Qianyue soaked Li Daocheng in the strengthened healing spirit liquid to heal him, and at the same time, she also carried out a comprehensive evaluation of his body. Chu Qianyue thought that she had found a good seedling, but the evaluation results greatly disappointed her. The comprehensive evaluation of all indicators barely passed. There were a total of 12 evaluation standards, and 3 of the evaluation results were less than 30 points. Fortunately, the mental strength evaluation was 80 points, and the physical coordination evaluation was 75 points. If it weren't for the fact that these 2 items were above average, Li Daocheng's final evaluation results would have been terrible. However, there was one thing that made Chu Qianyue a little surprised. According to the school's records, Li Daocheng's spiritual veins were exhausted, but her evaluation result was that this kid had 4 basic spiritual veins that were opened, and the other 5 were exhausted. Although it was still very bad, it was still a pass and not a cripple. If he worked hard enough, he would have no problem reaching the Qi gathering realm. Among the students taught by Chu Qianyue, the worst one had opened all 9 basic spiritual veins. The others were either 5 elements spiritual veins or profound heaven spiritual veins. Chu Qianyue never taught bad students. In Chu Qianyue's view, if she proposed special training for Li Daocheng, he would definitely agree unconditionally, and all the students in Xiansong University would fight to attend her class. Teacher Chu, I'm sorry, but let's forget about the special training. I don't have time. Li Daocheng was surprised, but his reasons still made him refuse Chu Qianyue. It's not that Li Daocheng didn't want to be specially trained by this excellent lecturer, but his current situation was very special. After Li Daocheng spent all his money yesterday, he decided to spend the next few days crazily studying the spiritual brain and thoroughly understand the spiritual-based programming. With the programming foundation of his previous life, he would comprehend the way of spiritual sequence in this life. Li Daocheng felt that he was about to touch the most crucial part of spiritual-based programming. Once he understood it, he would be able to use the spiritual brain to make all kinds of spiritual cards and rune cards. Spiritual cards were widely used in all kinds of spiritual machinery and equipment. Some magical equipment also used them. They were a kind of basic component. Rune cards, to put it bluntly, were multi-purpose consumables, mainly used for healing, exorcism, and attack. The best way to make spiritual cards and rune cards was to use the spiritual brain to design the spiritual sequence, and then use the array. It was transmitted. Spiritual sequence master, refiner, and pharmacist were the three most profitable professions in the cultivation civilization. If you want to cultivate, you have to make money first. If you don't have money, you can't cultivate. If you can't cultivate, how can you become the strongest cultivator? Just imagine it. Li Daochong had already planned out his future path. He would first become a spiritual sequence master, then make spiritual cards and rune cards to make money. Then, he would use the money he earned to buy dark ghosts that had their soul consciousness erased. Before reaching Foundation establishment, it was unrealistic to hunt dark ghosts himself. It was too dangerous, and there was the danger of losing his life at any time. It was best to buy ready-made dark ghosts to absorb in the early stages. How could he have the time to undergo 2 months of special training? Time was too precious for him. He had to master the spiritual base programming as soon as possible and become a spiritual sequence master. With the hot-blooded upgrader, it was easy for Li Daochong to cultivate purely. How to make money was the most pressing matter at the moment. Li Daochong flatly refused. Chu Qianyue was stunned. This brat's brain was really not that bright. Who would refuse a specially invited lecturer's special training? Especially for a weak student, it was a huge opportunity, an opportunity to change the wheel of fate. Do you know how many students in Profound Firmament University wish to receive my special one-on-one training? Chu Qianyue looked at Li Daochong as if his brain had been flooded with water. Teacher Chu, then you can look for them. I really don't have time. With that, Li Daochong was about to leave. Stop. Chu Qianyue's tone turned cold. Is anything else? Teacher Chu. Li Daochong turned his head and asked, It's fine if you don't want to follow my special training. You have to pay for the damaged testing device, the strength and healing spirit fluid, and the weightlessness room number 5 that I used to treat you today. There's no free lunch in this world. Chu Qianyue said indifferently. Li Daochong was a bit confused, but then he thought about it. As long as he could become a spiritual sequence master, he wouldn't be afraid of not having money. Previously, he had no choice but to go today because he was threatened. In the end, he suffered so much. What was the point of this legendary lecturer holding onto his weakness? Fine. Tell me, how much is it? Li Daochong gritted his teeth and asked. He still had 75,000 origin coins in his pocket. At worst, he could take it all out to pay. After all, after his fake marriage with Xiao Shimon next month, he still had 100,000 origin coins and 80 spirit stones. It was enough for his next semester's tuition and to buy a house. Moreover, as long as he became a spiritual sequence master, he wouldn't be afraid of not having money. A spiritual strength testing device costs 170,000 origin coins. The strengthened healing spirit fluid used for you is a high-quality one produced by Tianyuan Company. A total of 200 liters is used. 1 liter costs 21,000 origin coins. The weightlessness room number 5 has been remodeled. The rental fee is 10,000 origin coins. The total is 580,000 Federation coins. Please pay now. Chu Qianyue played it down. Her beautiful eyes narrowed slightly as she looked at Li Daochong. What? 580,000 Federation coins? Li Daochong cried out. Why don't you go rob a bank? The testing device costs 170,000 origin coins, but the healing spirit fluid costs 2,000 origin coins per liter? How is that possible? The best strengthened healing spirit fluid on the market costs no more than 500 origin coins per liter, and that's the best. Li Daochong thought so in his heart, but he didn't dare to say it out loud. Chu Qianyue was a lecturer in Profound Firmament University, second only to an associate professor. She held a lot of power. If he offended her, he definitely wouldn't have a good ending. His current situation was already very difficult. If he offended a specially invited lecturer who was very likely to become an honorary professor, he wouldn't be able to stay in Profound Firmament University any longer. How could the libraries outside compare to Profound Firmament University's library? If he wanted to become a spiritual sequence master, Profound Firmament University's library was definitely the best choice. Seeing that you're a student of our university, I've already given you a discount. 580,000 origin coins is the minimum. Chu Qianyue said expressionlessly. Teacher Chu, how can the strengthened healing spirit fluid be so expensive? Li Daochong was anxious. How is it not possible? The strengthened healing spirit fluid itself isn't cheap. After I bought it, I made a special concoction. If I were to sell it outside, it would cost at least 3,000 origin coins per liter. I'll give you 2,000 origin coins with a 60% discount. And you still think it's expensive? Chu Qianyue said with a serious face. You're ruthless, I admit defeat. Li Daochong clenched his teeth and said, Can you give me a down payment first? As for the rest, I'll pay 50,000 origin coins per month. You can count it as interest. Student Li, I'm sorry, but we don't accept credit. If you don't pay now, I'll inform the teaching office and the security department. They'll report you for damaging public property without compensation and violating the Federation's cultivation law. You'll have to bear legal responsibility. Buying without paying is considered fraud and robbery. The maximum sentence is 10 years in prison. Chu Qianyue shrugged. Li Daochong was dumbfounded. Coercion, a naked coercion. However, if you're willing to train with me, I'll be your training partner. I'll pay you 10,000 Federation coins each time. After 58 days, you'll be able to pay off this debt. Chu Qianyue continued. Li Daochong knew that he was being cheated, but there was nothing he could do. With Chu Qianyue's status, if she really wanted to report him, she would definitely be able to catch him. Plus, his current situation was special. If this matter came out, he would definitely be arrested by the Security Bureau and sent to prison. He had no choice. Can I only train for half a day? Li Daochong had no choice but to ask. Half a day should be enough for him to study. Chu Qianyue didn't answer immediately. She thought for a moment and said, If your performance is good, you can. Okay, it's a deal. Li Daochong was relieved. As long as she agreed, everything would be easy. After leaving the training hall, Li Daochong prepared to go home directly. There were many things to do. The parts of the floating pickup needed to be replaced, and the old models of spiritual computers needed to be repaired. Chapter 34. Li Daochong, go to the spiritual nexus and read the news. Your father's case has taken a major turn. Li Daochong's expression froze when he saw the message. He couldn't react in time. A few seconds later, he clicked on his wristwatch and entered the spiritual nexus. Because Li Daochong didn't have a virtual spiritual nexus ID, he couldn't log in as a virtual spiritual nexus mirror. He could only stand in the entrance hall and read the bullet comments on the spiritual nexus. All the front pages were about his father, Li Tianyang. Some were rehabilitated, some were cleared, and some were exposing the truth. The headlines were all eye-catching. Shocking news. Li Tianyang's defection reversed. Li Tianyang, commander of the Serious Third Army, returned to Blue Bay Star. Secrets of a defector. One of the two commanders of the Federation's northern territory colluded with the enemy, and the other was demonized. Li Tianyang's path of humiliation. Li Tianyang, commander of the Federation, endured humiliation and hid his courage for 100 days. A few minutes later, Li Daochong logged out of the spiritual nexus. He didn't need to read the message one by one. All he needed to know was that his father's name as a traitor had been cleared. However, everything had happened so fast and so suddenly that Li Daochong felt that it was unreal. He couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. If his father's name was cleared, all the problems that Li Daochong was facing right now would be solved. All the humiliation he had suffered before would be erased. Those who had ostracized and bullied Li Daochong would come to Li Daochong on their own accord and beg for mercy. Li Tianyang's ruthless methods were known by everyone in Blue Bay Star. Whoever dared to bully his son would be courting death. However, Li Daochong had a vague feeling that things weren't that simple. Otherwise, why didn't the Li family just drive a luxurious hovercar to school to welcome him? His first and second uncles, as well as the elders who had chased him out of the house, would definitely fight to apologize to him. They would say things like, I knew your father was innocent. Dao Chong, don't blame the elders for what they did to you. They were forced by the situation. Xiao Chong, I watched you grow up. My heart was bleeding when I chased you out of the house. Eldest nephew, you have to understand my difficulties. Everything I do is for the sake of the clan's interests. I have no choice but to do this. Li Daochong's mind flashed with the faces of his family's higher-ups who came to persuade him. But none of this happened. Xiao Shima was the first to inform him of the news, not the Li family. As one of the 4 major families, the Li family's information network was much wider and more sensitive than Xiao Shima's. The Indigo Bay Star's 4 great families should have already known about it a few days ago. Li Daochong quickly analyzed the situation in his mind. All the signs indicated that his father, Li Tianyang, had only been cleared of the charges. Everything else was still unknown. The Li family hadn't revealed any information about Li Tianyang being reinstated as the head of the family. This was very strange. Li Daochong narrowed his eyes. According to the news on the Spirit intranet, his father should have returned to the Blue Bay Star. He had only found out about it through the news. He sighed in his heart and walked out of the school gate. He took the public hover car and headed in the direction of the Li family. Zhao Peng was lying on the hospital bed. His body was wrapped in gauze like a mummy. Although he had been soaked in spirit liquid, it was a pity that it was low grade and his recovery was still very slow. Zhao Peng looked at the news on the screen and forgot about the pain in his body. His face was pale and he was scared out of his wits. Li Tianyang had returned, and his charges had been cleared. He had been framed. Zhao Peng had been lying in bed for the past few days, gritting his teeth in hatred. He was ready to take revenge on Li Daochong after his injuries were healed. But at this time, he didn't even have the courage to look for Li Daochong again, let alone take revenge. Everyone in the Blue Bay Star knew what kind of person Li Tianyang was. It was unreasonable for him to cover up. Once Li Daochong returned to the Li family, Zhao Peng would be nothing in his eyes. Zhao Peng was so scared that he forgot the pain in his body. He turned on his wristwatch and immediately contacted Zhang Honglai. Young Master Zhang, I've helped you with so many things. You must help me this time. I want to leave the Blue Bay Star. Leave? Why are you leaving? Li Tianyang will chop me into a meat patty. Li Tianyang? Don't worry, he won't. Young Master Zhang, don't you know? Li Tianyang's charges have been cleared, and he returned to the Blue Bay Star early this morning. Of course I know Li Tianyang is back. He's just a cripple. What are you afraid of? Cripple? Yes, Li Tianyang's Jin Dan is broken, his spirit base is dissolved, and he's seriously injured. He's about to die. What are you afraid of? Really? Nonsense. How can my news be fake? Take care of your injuries. When you're better, I'll give you a chi-stimulating pill. It can quickly raise your cultivation to the 5th level of chi refining. Chi-stimulating pill? Young Master Zhang, won't eating that affect my foundation? Peng Zi, you know better than me how much weight you have. How much potential can you have? Your foundation doesn't exist at all. It's better to use some extreme methods to raise your cultivation. As long as you follow me, entering the chi gathering stage won't be a problem. Okay, that's it. Zhang Honglai turned off his wristwatch. His face revealed a trace of annoyance. Li Tianyang's rehabilitation was definitely bad news for him. Even if Li Tianyang was crippled, the Li family was bound to summon Li Daochong back. Once Li Daochong became a member of the Li family, his plan to get rid of Li Daochong would not be so easy. Zhang Honglai raised his wine cup and took a big gulp. His plan to get Xiao Shima had changed again. Tianyuan City's main street. Li Daochong stood outside the grand gate of the Li mansion. This was the place where he grew up. A few months ago, he was mercilessly kicked out, and no one tried to speak up for him. Li Tianyang had been the head of the Li family for many years and had monopolized the power. As the clan grew, there were all kinds of people. In addition, Li Tianyang did things swiftly and decisively. He never said much to others, causing many of the higher-ups to lose face. In recent years, Li Tianyang had spent too much energy and money on Li Daochong. The higher-ups finally could not sit still, and several conflicts broke out between them. However, Li Tianyang was too strong. In the end, they had no choice but to swallow their anger and retreat. However, after Li Tianyang's accident, everyone kicks a man who is down. The higher-ups vented all the resentment they had accumulated over the years. Li Daochong did not have a good impression of these cold-blooded relatives who did not care about right or wrong and only cared about their own interests. They were worse than strangers. It was good to live outside with Yinping. The gate of the Li family was wide open. Many of the clansmen had rushed into the Li mansion. The news had obviously spread, and they all came back to take a look. If Li Tianyang really wanted to come back, no matter what method he used, his final destination would be the Li mansion. Li Daochong's expression revealed a hint of coldness. His father's crime had been cleared, and he had no more worries. He no longer had to act like a fool, and he no longer had to hide his strength. His father had betrayed the army, and his son had pretended to be a fool to hide his strength. There were too many places to make a fuss about. He could even play Li Daochong to death. Now, none of these existed. His father had not betrayed the army, betrayed the country, or committed those horrible crimes. No matter what state Li Daochong was in, he could not make a fuss about it. Li Daochong was still not used to pretending to be a fool. It was best to be himself. Li Daochong's expression was calm as he slowly walked through the gate of the Li mansion. Li Daochong's appearance immediately attracted the attention of many of the clansmen. Of the thousands of people in the Li family, there was almost no one who did not know of Li Daochong. Li Tianyang had been at the peak of his power, but it was because he had given birth to such a foolish son that his reputation had been ruined. In the eyes of most of the Li family, Li Daochong was the main culprit behind the decline of the Li family. If not for his birth, Li Tianyang would not have failed to break through, and would not have been stuck at the early stage of Jindan, unable to break through. He would also not have been distracted by this useless fool, causing him to ignore the affairs of the clan. Perhaps this was not enough to be hated by the clansmen. It was just that Li Daochong had not lived up to expectations, and his reputation in the clan was not very good. He was lecherous and stupid. Just these 2 points alone were enough to cause him to be despised. Thus, when the clansmen saw Li Daochong walk into the Li mansion, their eyes were filled with contempt and disdain. If not for the news of Li Tianyang's return, Li Daochong would probably have been kicked out before he even stepped through the gate. Li Daochong ignored the gazes all around him and quickened his steps. He only wanted to see his father, Li Tianyang, as soon as possible. The Li mansion's discussion hall, which was usually relatively quiet, was now filled with a sea of people. Several cultivators wearing Federation cultivator uniforms stood solemnly. A field officer was pushing Li Tianyang, who was sitting in a wheelchair. The officer faced the Li family's first elder, Li Longbo, and said, "We have sent Regiment Commander Li Tianyang back. Although Regiment Commander Li Tianyang's crimes have been cleared, he still violated military discipline. He exposed the merits of the 2 commanders-in-chief and indiscriminately killed the innocent. He also killed several officers who were not implicated, including one who was the grandson of a Federation member. Regiment Commander Li Tianyang has both merits and demerits. Our army has decided to remove Regiment Commander Li Tianyang from all military positions. He is innocent and has no merits. He will be discharged from the army as an ordinary soldier." After speaking, the officer turned around and left with the other officers. Every member of the Li family, both inside and outside the discussion hall, heard this and were all dumbfounded. When they received the news, they originally came to welcome the return of the head of the Li family. When they saw the news, they thought that Li Tianyang would return home with glorious military exploits, and that the Li family would use this opportunity to once again become the head of the 4 great families of Blue Bay Star. Who would have thought that this would be the result? Li Tianyang was sitting in a wheelchair. He was directly advised to retire from the army, and he was even discharged in the lowest rank. The Li family's proud and fragile hearts completely collapsed. Many of the collateral family members immediately left after hearing this, and the direct family members who didn't have much power also left. Only the 3 elders, the acting head of the family, and the chief steward were left in the discussion hall. First elderly Longbo, second elderly Mubai, and third elder Li Qibing. They were all Li Tianyang's uncles. The acting head of the family, Li Tianhe, was Li Tianyang's older brother, and the chief steward, Li Tianxing, was Li Tianyang's younger brother. The five of them were the highest representatives of the Li family. After everyone left, the five of them looked at each other in dismay. In reality, they had already known everything that had happened yesterday. Thus, they didn't show any surprise on their faces. They had already mentally prepared themselves, and they had already discussed how to settle Li Tianyang down last night. Tianyang, you've worked hard this time. The family still has a piece of land in the Western District that needs someone to look after. It's perfect for you to retire. What do you think? Li Tianhe asked meaningfully. It didn't matter whether Li Tianyang agreed or not. Li Tianyang had long known that this would be the result. He understood his uncles and brothers all too well. They couldn't wait to see him become a laughingstock. He was already crippled, and he probably didn't have much time left. Nothing in the world mattered anymore. All he needed to do was peacefully live out his last days. Li Tianyang had no desires. If it weren't for Li Daochong, he wouldn't even want this piece of land. It could be considered the last of his inheritance to his son. If he didn't want it, the Li family wouldn't have given it to Li Daochong. No objections. It's decided then, Li Tianyang said straightforwardly. Good. I'll have someone send you there. Li Tianhe didn't expect Li Tianyang to agree so readily. He couldn't help but smile. His position as acting head of the family was set in stone. Chapter 35. Li Daochong's appearance surprised the upper echelons of the Li family. This idiot actually knew to come back and pick up his father. His brain knows how to turn. That's not easy. Li Tianhe smiled. That's fine. Since that house is for your father's retirement, it will be yours in the future. You and your father haven't seen each other for a long time, so we won't disturb you. Tomorrow, we will announce to the public that you and your father have been reinstated as members of the Li family. Li Daochong didn't listen to Li Tianhe at all. He walked straight to Li Tianyang and pushed his wheelchair out. He didn't want to stay in this place for even a second longer. Li Tianyang was seriously injured. He thought it would be Li Qingyao who came to pick him up. He didn't expect it to be Li Daochong. This idiot's son still remembered him as his father. He didn't raise him in vain. Li Daochong pushed Li Tianyang out of the Li residence. But when they walked out of the Li residence and into another street, two people flew out of the void. One was an old man, and the other was a middle-aged man. The old man had a black spear under his feet. The middle-aged man had a silver sword under his feet. They were flying on their swords. Their cultivations were unfathomable. Li Daochong felt an invisible pressure hit him in the face, making him unable to move. His chest was stuffy, and his breath was short. He felt indescribably uncomfortable. He felt like he was sinking into the depths of the sea, suppressed by the terrifying water pressure. He could be crushed to pieces at any time. Cough, cough. Li Tianyang coughed violently. A trace of loneliness flashed through his eyes. How could this kind of pressure make him uncomfortable? But now, not only was he uncomfortable, but his injuries had also worsened. Li Tianyang, you also had a day like this? The heavens have eyes. Back then, you took Yin-Er away, but didn't treat her well. You even let her die in the Hades. You finally received your retribution. The middle-aged man looked at Li Tianyang with satisfaction. Brother Yin Zhongli, you still can't let it go. No wonder you've been stuck at the foundation establishment stage for so long and still can't break through. Li Tianyang laughed. Why can't I let go? I just feel bad for Yin-Er. So this is the stupid son that you and Yin-Er gave birth to. He is indeed stupid. Yin Zhongli snorted coldly and looked at Li Daochong. That snort made Li Daochong feel as if someone had struck him hard in the chest. His blood and qi churned, and he almost vomited blood. I'm relieved to see you like this. Your glabella is black and your heart is white. You don't have long to live. Li Tianyang, I'm relieved to see you like this. I'll attend your funeral. Yin Zhongli flew into the sky after he finished speaking. Li Tianyang turned to the old man. Qiu Xiong, are you here to laugh at me too? Qiu Xiong stroked his beard and shook his head. I'm not here to laugh at you. I'm here to tell you to scram. If you don't want to die, you'd better scram out of Blue Bay, Star as soon as possible, and find a corner to spend the rest of your life. The Goo family won't find trouble with you then. Otherwise, you and your son will die a horrible death. Li Tianyang's gaze turned cold. You dare to threaten me? Qiu Xiong raised his hand and swung it. Li Daochong was shocked. He took a step forward and stood in front of Li Tianyang to protect him. Slap. There was a crisp sound. Li Daochong's face was slap hard. He slapped his face through the air. You hit my son. Qiu Xiong, you're courting death. Li Tianyang ignored his serious injuries and stood up from his wheelchair. His aura suddenly changed, and a majestic spirit energy burst out. Qiu Xiong jumped in fright and flew back more than 10 meters. He looked at Li Tianyang with fear. Li Tianyang, don't play with fire. Your Jin Dan is broken. If you continue to circulate your qi, you'll immediately die. Li Tianyang stood proudly with his head held high. He didn't look weak at all. Even if I die, I'll drag you down with me. If you have the guts, slap me again. Qiu Xiong's turbid eyes flashed. He sneered. Slapping your son in front of you is enough for me to vent my anger. I've already passed on the Goo family's message. I won't lower myself to the level of a lunatic like you. You'll suffer in the future. With that, Qiu Xiong flew into the sky. A few seconds later, Li Tianyang confirmed that Qiu Xiong had indeed left. He collapsed in his wheelchair and coughed violently. Dad, Li Daochong supported Li Tianyang. It's okay. He won't die. Let's go. Li Tianyang patted Li Daochong's shoulder. Li Daochong stood up and looked in the direction that the old man flew. He pushed his wheelchair and continued to walk forward. The father and son disappeared at the end of the street under the afterglow of the setting sun. After walking for several blocks, the father and son did not speak. Li Tianyang was now in his twilight years. He no longer had the ability to protect his foolish son. What happened just now was the best example. In the future, this kind of thing would happen frequently. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Li Daochong didn't know what to say. He just wanted to continue pushing his father. Little Chong, the Western District is far away. Aren't you tired pushing me like this? Let's take the car. Although I'm in dire straits now, I still have the money to take a car. Li Tianyang saw that Li Daochong didn't respond and just continued pushing him. He was worried that his foolish son would start acting silly again. Li Daochong pushed Li Tianyang all the way. Looking at the gray hair behind his head, he felt a little choked up. Dad, I've already sent a message to Yinping. She'll drive over to pick us up in a while. You've been taking care of me all these years. Let me push you a little longer today. You must have suffered a lot recently. Take a good look at the scenery along the way and take a rest. Li Tianyang had a head of black hair a few months ago. He was only 45 years old and was a Jin Dan cultivator. His lifespan was far longer than that of ordinary people. In just a few months, his hair had turned white and there were wrinkles on his face. It was obvious that he had suffered serious internal injuries. Li Daochong felt that there was a very strong aura of death in Li Tianyang's body. His vitality was fading bit by bit. Li Daochong's orderly response stunned Li Tianyang for a moment. He turned to look at his son. His face was still the same, but the foolishness of the past had disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a kind of steadiness and calmness that he had never had before. Little Chong, Dad has let you down. I've let you suffer. Li Tianyang said with emotion. Dad, don't say that. You're the one who has let me down the most in this world. Don't worry, I'll definitely find a way to heal your injuries and let you return to the Jin Dan stage. Li Daochong's calm voice carried an unshakable firmness. After a simple conversation, Li Tianyang realized that he didn't seem to recognize this foolish son of his. However, he liked this kind of son. Sitting in the wheelchair, Li Tianyang's old face that shouldn't have appeared at his age showed a gratified smile. After walking for a while, Yinping drove the levitation pickup truck according to the location sent by Li Daochong and found the father and son pair. Seeing that Li Tianyang was still alive, Yinping couldn't control herself and cried, Master, you're back. Yes, I'm back. Thank you for taking care of little Chong these days. Master, sob, please don't say that. It's all Yinping's responsibility. Yinping cried. Silly child, what are you crying for? You should be happy to see your master. Li Tianyang scratched Yinping's little nose. Yes, happy. Yinping is very happy. Sob sob. Yinping laughed and cried. The three of them got on a levitation pickup truck, and Li Daochong drove directly to the Li family's house that had been abandoned for many years. It was several blocks away from where he and Yinping lived. In the past, the Li family used it as a warehouse, but they stopped using it after the Xiqing district became a slum. The entire house was very large, with more than a dozen rooms and 2 courtyards, one big and one small. The big courtyard was more than 200 square meters, and the small courtyard was only a few dozen square meters. It had been abandoned for a long time, and it was similar to a zombie house. The courtyard was overgrown with weeds, and there were dozens of small bamboos scattered around the courtyard. There were a few sycamore trees in the middle. Yinping busied herself as soon as she entered the house, and she quickly tidied up her room. Li Daochong took Li Tianyang's pulse and found that there were 3 different types of death aura in his father's body. 2 were weak and 1 was strong. These 3 types of death aura intertwined and complemented each other, slowly eating away at his father's vitality. Father, have you been possessed by a dark ghost? Li Daochong asked. No. If you want to possess me, it's impossible unless you're a dark ghost. I was ambushed, and a soul catcher almost took my Jin Dan. Although I countered the soul catcher, I was still infected by the death aura. The Jin Dan was corroded, and its spirit base was broken. There's death aura left in my body, and I'm already a cripple, Li Tianyang replied. As he spoke, he seemed to have aged a little. Li Tianyang had been so glorious in the past. 20 years ago, he was the #1 genius of the Blue Bay Star. As a Jin Dan cultivator, he had fallen to his current state. No matter how carefree he was, the difference between heaven and hell was something he couldn't let go of. Li Daochong frowned slightly. Li Tianyang was right, but when he was taking his pulse, the blood-boiling level-up device had given him a notification. It had discovered the power of the soul catcher's remnant soul. It was this remnant soul power that had corroded Li Tianyang's Jin Dan and shattered its spirit base. Father, bear with it. I'll see if I can get rid of the death aura in your body, Li Daochong said seriously. Little Chong, I know you're different from before, but you're still far from being able to resist the death aura in my body. Even a Yuanian cultivator would be helpless against my injuries. Don't waste your spirit chi in vain, lest you hurt yourself instead. Father's fine. As long as you're fine, that's more important than anything. Li Tianyang stopped him. Father, trust me this once. Li Daochong's expression was focused. The soul catcher was indeed not something Li Daochong could deal with. Even if it was just a remnant soul, it wasn't something a mere chi refinement cultivator could deal with. Jin Dan cultivators had to be careful when dealing with soul catcher. If they weren't careful, they would fall for it. Even with the blood-boiling level-up device, Li Daochong didn't have absolute confidence that he could get rid of the remnant soul in Li Tianyang's body. However, even if it hurt him, he still had to try. The remnant soul had caused too much damage to Li Tianyang's body. It couldn't be left alive. It would be very dangerous to leave it alive for even a second longer. Li Tianyang still wanted to stop him, but Li Daochong had already transferred spirit chi into Li Tianyang's body. Father, concentrate the spirit chi in your dantian. We'll deal with that death chi together. You might feel more uncomfortable, so bear with it. Li Daochong's expression was serious. All right, son. I'll listen to you today. Come at me. I won't even frown if I have to climb a mountain of swords or plunge into a sea of flames. Let alone this. Li Tianyang was only halfway through his sentence when a pain that came from the depths of his soul stopped him abruptly. Ugh! Even though Li Tianyang could bear the bone-scraping pain, he still let out a muffled groan. His expression was twisted in pain. A few minutes later, Li Tianyang felt his soul being ignited. It was as if he was being tortured in purgatory. He was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. Li Daochong's body was trembling nonstop. Not long after, He was already drenched in sweat. White mist rose from his hair, and his face became pale. The Remnant Soul's counterattack was shockingly powerful. Even the blood-boiling level-up device couldn't control it. Li Daocheng was shocked. He thought that the blood-boiling level-up device was invincible. It turned out that it wasn't. How could a soul catcher's Remnant Soul be so powerful? Li Daocheng quickly realized that the blood-boiling level-up device was upgraded according to his strength. Last time, when he dealt with the black wraith-binding spirit in the middle-aged man's body, he had felt a little strained. However, after absorbing that black wraith-binding spirit, absorbing stronger spirit ghosts and wolf ghosts was not as difficult. From this, it could be seen that the blood-boiling level-up device was also gradually upgrading. If he absorbed too much of a powerful dark ghost, the blood-boiling level-up device might not be able to absorb the dark ghost. Instead, it might be devoured by the dark ghost. That would be the end of him. Li Daocheng focused 120% of his mind to deal with the Remnant Soul. If not for his powerful mind, he would have been destroyed by the Remnant Soul. Of course, Li Qianyang's support was more important. Even though he was seriously injured, the quantity and quality of his spiritual energy was far above Li Daocheng's. He blocked most of the backlash. As a golden core cultivator, even if Li Tianyang didn't know what his son was doing, he knew that he had to bear the brunt of the backlash. Otherwise, with his son's meager amount of spiritual energy, he would definitely be killed by the death chi. The entire room, with Li Tianyang as the center, emitted a terrifying deathly aura. Silver Bottle wanted to push the door open, but was directly sent flying. Li Daocheng shouted, "Silver Bottle, don't come in. Stay away." "Yes, young master." Silver Bottle didn't know what was going on. She hurriedly responded and didn't dare to approach the room. 10 minutes passed. 20 minutes passed. An hour passed. Li Daocheng's body was getting hotter and hotter, while Li Tianyang's body was getting colder and colder. The father and son, one fire and one ice, were enduring unimaginable pain. The two looked at each other, but both smiled. "Son, let's kill that thing together with me." "Okay." The father and son were of the same mind. Constriction. 9 Thorns beep. A familiar beep sounded in the depths of Li Daocheng's mind. Soul Catcher's Remnant Soul killed. Soul power gained. Host leveled up to level 8. The Remnant Soul power finally couldn't resist the suction of the whirlpool and was sucked in by the hot-blooded upgrader. Li Daocheng only felt the spiritual energy in his body grow crazily, like bamboo shoots after a rain. The 5th spirit meridian was instantly activated and expanded, followed by the 6th, 7th, and 8th spirit meridian. The whole process only stopped when the 8th spirit meridian was slightly full. 7 of the 9 basic spirit meridians in Li Daocheng's body were activated. Only the last 2 were still in a dormant state. The other 7 were thick and powerful, more than twice the size of a normal spirit meridian. What was incredible was that Li Daocheng directly rose 2 levels this time, skipping 7 levels and instantly reaching level 8. Chi Refinement level 8. Li Daocheng wasn't the only one who benefited. Li Qianyang's death aura disappeared, and the broken spirit base healed a little. The broken gene, Dan, slowly gathered on the spirit base placenta. Although it didn't condense back into a gene Dan, it was no longer in a melting state. It regained a trace of vitality. Li Qianyang's cultivation fell to Chi Refinement level 7 after he was seriously injured, but now it recovered to Chi Refinement level 10. "Ha, I'm saved. I'm saved." Li Tianyang looked up and laughed. The haze from before was swept away. Chapter 36. Li Daocheng fainted for an entire night and only woke up the next morning. The moment he opened his eyes, everything around him seemed to become exceptionally clear. Not only that, the hidden energy left by Zhan Honglai on Li Daocheng's left shoulder had completely disappeared. When he reached the 6th layer of Qi refining, the pain had lessened a lot, but it was still there. On the day he was tortured by Chu Qianyue, the pain had intensified, and in the end, it had even dislocated. Fortunately, The spirit liquid that Chu Qianyue gave Li Daocheng to treat his injuries was of the highest quality, so it was connected back. But now Li Daocheng could not feel any pain in his left shoulder at all, and he no longer had the feeling that it would dislocate at any time. Li Daocheng revealed a faint smile. It seemed that when his cultivation surpassed Zhan Honglie's, the hidden energy left behind by Zhan Honglai was naturally eliminated. Stretching his arm, Li Daocheng sat up and found himself lying on a simple wooden bed. Yinping was lying on the head of the bed, tears hanging from the corners of her eyes, and her face was haggard. Whenever something happened to Li Daocheng, this girl would be scared out of her wits. She would guard Li Daocheng closely, afraid that something would happen to him. Li Daocheng stared at Yinping, who was sleeping soundly, and felt a bit of heartache. No one would feel comfortable lying on the head of the bed like this for an entire night. Li Daocheng got up and picked up Yinping, preparing to put her on the bed and let her sleep more comfortably. But just as he picked up Yinping, the girl woke up. A pair of clear eyes blinked as she looked at Li Daocheng, her beautiful face flushed red. Yinping's heart was in a mess, and she said in a small voice, "Young master, Yinping is still young. I can't." When she said this, Li Daocheng almost threw Yinping away. What the hell? What was this girl thinking? Li Daocheng wanted to explain, but he swallowed the words back. He was afraid that no matter how he explained, it would be useless and would only make things worse. Li Daocheng didn't say anything. He put the silver bottle on the bed and covered himself with a thin blanket. He coughed and said, "You sleep a little longer. I'll make breakfast this morning." "Oh," Yinping answered obediently. She shyly looked at Li Daocheng with her big eyes. "Young master, wait a few more years. Go to sleep. Don't think too much," Li Daocheng urged. "Oh." Li Daocheng turned around and covered his face with one hand. "Why did I do that? This girl's servant mindset is simply driving me crazy." Awkward 2F * King awkward. Li Daocheng quickly walked out of the house to prepare breakfast. Li Tianyang also consumed a lot of energy yesterday. After Li Daocheng fainted, he felt his pulse and confirmed that he was fine. He also went to bed early. After waking up, Li Tianyang found that the spirit base in his body had stabilized, and his body was slowly recovering. As for how much he could recover, he could only leave it to fate. However, this was already the best result. Li Tianyang guessed that his son must have had some fortuitous encounter while he was away. On the path of cultivation, talent, resources, and fortuitous encounters, as long as one could have any one of them, it would greatly help one's cultivation in the future. It could even change one's body. Li Tianyang felt like he had fallen into hell yesterday and would never be reincarnated. However, in one night, he was reborn. Life was like a dream. In the morning, Li Daocheng personally cooked and prepared a sumptuous breakfast. Between his appetite and Li Tianyang's, the portions were naturally quite sufficient. During breakfast, Yinping slept very soundly. Li Daocheng didn't wake her up. This girl must have been watching over him all night and only slept when she couldn't take it anymore. It must have been hard on him. The father and son finished the 3 plates of sea beast meat and were only half full. After breakfast, Li Daocheng went to school. Li Tianyang recuperated. His injuries needed to be healed, so he definitely wouldn't be able to move around in the short term. Thump, thump. In the weightlessness room number 5 of the training center, heavy crashing sounds were continuously heard throughout the whole morning. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Li Daocheng walked out of the weightlessness room with trembling legs, holding the wall. Chu Qianyue increased the difficulty level, and Li Daocheng fell into a struggle again. Fortunately, he broke through 2 levels yesterday and reached the 8th level of qi refining. Under the nourishment of the spiritual energy, his body evolved. However, even if his body was strengthened, after hundreds of heavy falls, he still couldn't avoid the pain all over his body. When it was over, Li Daocheng almost couldn't stand up. He only felt better after drinking a bottle of recovery water given by Chu Qianyue. Li Daocheng went out of the training center and went straight to the library. However, his legs didn't listen to him, and he could only limp. Along the way, All the students who saw Li Daochong would inadvertently glance at him. Hey, Li Daochong, that fool, is going to change his life. I heard that his father, Li Tianyang, was not a rebel and was framed. It said that he has been rehabilitated and the Federation no longer wants him. Change his life? Come on, didn't you read the news? Li Tianyang's merits offset his faults. He was forced to retire by the military and was seriously injured. He won't live long. Really? If Li Tianyang really dies, won't that fool be tortured to death? Not only is he stupid, he's also a pervert. Of course he'll be tortured. Yeah, last time he stuck out his ass in front of Qiao Shima in public, many of Qiao Shima's admirers want to get even with him. From time to time, the passing students would talk about Li Daochong, and their voices were very loud. Li Daochong didn't care about the ostentatious pointing and talking. They could say whatever they wanted, as long as they didn't bother him. He just wanted to go to the library as soon as possible. Li Daochong couldn't walk fast. His legs were weak, and he couldn't stand falling for a few hours. Chu Qinhue wasn't training him at all. She was clearly torturing him. This kid's walking is weird. Did he get beaten up? It's normal to get beaten up. Last time he cheated in a duel with Zhao Peng, and Zhao Peng was seriously injured. Zhao Peng is a member of the biggest club in our school, the Green Wolf Club. I heard that the Green Wolf Club wanted to teach this kid a lesson. Someone must have taught him a lesson. TSK, TSK, TSK. Being targeted by the Green Wolf Club. This kid doesn't have the protection of his family and his father. He'll suffer. He'll be beaten to a pulp in the final exam. Now that he's beaten to a pulp, he'll be decomposed into fertilizer in the final exam. Haha. Wherever Li Daochong went, there were sounds of ridicule. However, he turned a deaf ear to them. His mind was full of spiritual base programming. When he arrived at the library, he plunged into the sea of books, eagerly absorbing the nutrients in the books. The strength of his telekinesis continued to increase, and Li Daochong's reading efficiency increased a lot. He read more than 10 books in one afternoon. When he returned home in the evening, Li Daochong ate and drank to his heart's content and went into the room to fiddle with the old spiritual computers that had malfunctioned. During the day, Silver Bottle and Li Tianyang moved all the things in the rented room to this place. Each of them had a room, and there were more than 10 rooms left, which were temporarily empty. Li Daochong planned to renovate these rooms when he had time. In the following days, Li Daochong lived every day to the fullest, and he wished he could break himself apart. Li Daochong became more and more accustomed to the training in the weightless room, and the speed of his progress was beyond imagination. After 5 days, he was completely adapted to the highest gravity shift. This was far beyond Chu Qinyue's expectations. She originally thought that this kid could adapt to it within 20 days. However, Li Daochong only took 5 days. On the 6th day, when Li Daochong jumped up and down in the weightless room with ease, Chu Qinyue's beautiful eyes, which rarely changed, actually flashed with a look of shock. In the past, Augustine had to endure 30 days in the weightless room for basic adaptation, and the frequency of changes at that time was not as high as now. On this day, when Li Daochong effortlessly made a 360-degree turn and landed on the ground, the gravity shift stopped. Li Daochong felt strange. Teacher Chu, why did you stop? Did you finish practicing today? As soon as he finished speaking, Li Daochong felt a gust of wind behind his back. He was startled and instinctively bent down to dodge. Bang! But the speed was really too fast. Li Daochong was hit, and his whole body flew out and fell flat on his face. Chu Qinyue did not give any warning, and the sneak attack was successful. Of course, Chu Qinyue controlled her cultivation level to the 5th layer of the aura refining realm because she estimated the strength of Li Daochong's cultivation level. Last time when Li Daochong passed out, Chu Qinyue tested his cultivation level, and the result was the 6th layer of the aura refining realm. Chu Qinyue felt that starting from the 5th layer of the aura refining realm was just right, and she could slowly lower her cultivation level later. Chu Qinyue was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Even if she controlled her strength to the 5th layer of the aura refining realm, she was still much stronger than the real fifth layer of the aura refining realm. The training of spatial perception was to fight in a chaotic space, to sense the changes in space, and not create any misconceptions or gaps. "Why did you hit me?" Li Daochong got up and stared at Chu Qianyue and asked. "I hit you," Chu Qianyue said lightly. "You." Li Daochong had just spat out a word when Chu Qianyue appeared in front of him and slapped him. Slap! Li Daochong firmly grabbed Chu Qianyue's wrist. Huh? Chu Qianyue was stunned. This guy could see her move clearly. Chu Qianyue's eyes flickered. She underestimated him, but now she did not activate the gravity shift and was just in a normal state. What if they were in a disordered space? Chu Qianyue immediately activated the gravity shift, and the direction of gravity in the room changed immediately. The two of them kept changing up and down in the space. In the rapid change, Chu Qianyue kicked Li Daochong, who raised his arm to block. Bang! The two of them separated. But Li Daochong took the hit and immediately lost his direction, falling heavily on the plane where the gravity was. "Miss Chu, if you hit me again, I'll fight back." Li Daochong was anxious. "If you can hit me, today's training will end immediately, and I'll give you an extra 10,000 yuan training fee," Chu Qianyue said playfully. At this moment, she was actually a little excited. "That's what you said." Li Daochong licked his lips and rushed up to hit him without saying a word. However, as soon as Li Daochong moved, the direction of gravity had changed, and so did his center of gravity. Even though he adjusted, his punch missed, and he almost fell down. Chu Qianyue seized the opportunity and punched Li Daochong in the chest, knocking him to the ground. Li Daochong got up, but he didn't attack immediately. He gathered all his strength and pushed his spiritual energy to the peak. After dodging Chu Qianyue's 2 attacks, he kicked out. Chu Qianyue was as light as a swallow. Even if the gravity kept changing, it didn't affect her movement at all. She easily dodged Li Daochong's kick. When Li Daochong withdrew his kick, his whole body rushed out like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey. Chu Qianyue gritted her teeth. "Stinky boy, you dare to use this trick on me? See how I'll teach you a lesson." She wanted to grab Li Daochong's waist. Li Daochong's body paused. Chu Qianyue hit his vital part. Li Daochong snorted and grabbed Chu Qianyue's wrist. He grinned. "I fell into her trap." Grabbing her wrist, Li Daochong naturally wouldn't let go. He used both his hands and feet. Bang! He kicked Chu Qianyue's arm. "Miss Chu, I hit you." Li Daochong smiled. Chu Qianyue's face was livid. She was too careless and fell into this boy's trap. But how could this guy be so fast? "Training is over," Chu Qianyue said unwillingly. Li Daochong immediately rushed out of the zero-gravity room and went to the library. However, not long after Li Daochong left, a small door in the corner of the zero-gravity room opened and an old man walked out. "Qianyue, you recently suspended classes because of this boy?" The old man asked puzzledly. If Li Daochong hadn't left, he would have been shocked to see this kind-looking old man. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.